All right. Well, hi everyone. Welcome to our lunch party. I am here with my
Joining us.
friend. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We were getting our giveaway ready and we forgot to add ourselves to so where we're at. But I'm Carla with an Unexpected Journal, and I am here with Zach Schmal, and he is our managing editor. And this is our launch party for the Shakespeare issue of an Unexpected Journal. So I'm going to let Zach tell you a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Carla. Thanks for helping us coordinate all the giveaways that we'll tell you more about in a minute. Um, but yeah, we're really excited to be here. We have a great lineup for you today, and we like to have these launch parties because all of you support the journal, and we love it. And thank you so much for that. But sometimes you read the journal and you want to meet the people behind the journal, right? You want to know and see the faces and hear the voices of the people who wrote. And as authors, and I imagine Carla would agree with me, sometimes you write that article or you write that poem and you have more you want to talk about. You want to go deeper. But more than that, you want to go deeper with people who are really excited about it, just like you are. And so the purpose of our launch party is to help put our authors into conversation with each other. They get to share what they've written and they get to kind of dive deeper and talk more about all the great things that this journal has in it. And so we're really grateful you're here today. We're really excited to be able to talk about this with you. And I think that you may be wondering, though, say this is your first time here, a little bit more about who we are as an unexpected journal. So maybe, I mean, Carla, do you want to introduce a little bit more about our publication, who we are, what we do?
So this actually started in, Zach can tell you, started from a Facebook post in 2017. And so a group of us went through what was then known as Houston Baptist University's and now known as Houston Christian University's Cultural Apologetics Journal. And the focus of I have such a hard time saying this, HCU's Cultural Apologetics program is a little different than what you will find in most programs or in most books. And so we do learn the propositional arguments and the reasons for God that are standard traditional apologetics. But the idea came from John Mark Reynolds. When he first came to the university, he started two very excellent programs. One was the cultural apologetics program, and the other was their film program. His idea for the cultural apologetics program was apologetics for the band kids. Some it's just a little bit different, and so our approach is more. Brenton Dickinson called it subversively invitational. So we take the things that are in culture, the things that we love, and we show how aspects of those are a reflection of God's truth. And so the things that we write about may be a little bit different than what you will see in other ones. We have issues on film and music. We have issues on movies, on dragons, just a lot of different topics. And it's really more about storytelling and showing how those stories can give us a little bit better idea of how we fit into God's great story. So that's how we are a little bit different. And it's, I was just thinking about this morning. It's about these things that we already love. Like if you love Harry Potter or Star Wars, or it's like people can write essays and they show how this little thing that you love in this story, it's because it's as God's imager, God has He's given us this desire for it. And it's just showing a little bit clearer picture of that. And so that's what Jesus did with his parables. So I have an essay in the medieval issue about Jesus and Aesop. So a lot of his parables were kind of a little bit of a tweaking of Aesop fables. And he used things that people were familiar with in culture to show who God was. And so that is what this is. It started with contributors from the apologetics program, and it expanded. So we love to have other people that come and have fun with us, talk about literature and stories and movies that we love, and how that's kind of helps us understand Jesus a little bit better. So that is what we do. And this one, usually it's editors. Just tell you a little bit of story behind this issue. Oh, again, the idea came in November 2017. Our first issue was April 2018, and we've been pretty much running on a full-on sprint, running right up to the deadline for the past 5 years. And so we've tried to move up our publishing schedule and didn't quite work. And the beginning of this year, we thought the only way we're going to be able to do something a little less crazy is if we do 2 issues at once. And so Joe Rickey and Sarah Waters agreed to take on this one for us, and we really, really appreciate it. This is like seriously a serious major shift for the journal to be um, not be pushing the literally final deadline to get things out every single time. And so we really, really appreciate it. I can't even explain to you what a major thing this is for us as a publication, being able to make this leap, because we've tried and we weren't able to get to that point. So this is a little bit different, and it's been really, I was just looking at all the sources that you guys had, and it's just really cool to see different groups of people coming in and kind of expanding that pool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. I think, and in a few minutes, we're going to obviously transition and let Joe and Sarah introduce themselves to you and tell you a little bit more about this issue specifically. But before we go, one thing I would be remiss if I did not tell you was that obviously we're a publication, and you can read anything we have online at an unexpectedjournal.com. But our readers are book people. You might be a book person. You like to hold a literal paper book in your hand. Um, and so if that's you, and there's the beautiful cover for this issue and our schedule for today that I know Joe and Sarah, I think, will be expanding on a bit more in a moment. Um, but if you want to subscribe to an unexpected journal, you can do that right on our website. This issue will be on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, places like that in the near future. All of our back catalog is there as well. So if you want to buy them there, obviously feel free to do that. If you're like most of us and you want to save money, an annual subscription is better for that option. Um, so please, we we're grateful to this. We love to do this, and we love to put books in people's hands. And just one more thing to that point, we're going to have some giveaways later. So if you are on Facebook, YouTube, wherever you're watching us right now, if you put in # the
Don't do it yet,
bard.
though. Wait.
Well,
Don't do it yet, because I have to load the giveaway tool. It's
oh,
going to be, we'll get to that. It's going to be at the
okay,
first
sorry.
intermission.
Sorry, Walt, don't listen to
Yeah.
me.
So Joe and I are going to be talking a little bit about this issue. We're going to transition to them in about 30 seconds. And then from 2:30 to 3, we have Shakespeare and the Poets with Corey Latta, Crystal Hurd, Jennifer Woodruff Tate, and then at 3 o'clock, we have portrayals of Shakespearean tales. And there is going to be Tracy Manning, Louis Marcos, and Connor Salter. And Louis Marcos is he's a professor at Houston Christian University. So one HCU connection there. And at 3:30, we're going to have the intermission. So you can enter the hashtag there. We'll be getting it up in a little bit. So don't enter it quite yet. But if you have comments or want to give feedback, you can type that in the chat. And then at 3:45, we're going to be having Shakespearean characterizations with Joe Rickey, Jack Heller, and John Cox. And then at 4:15, our last segment is going to be King Lear and Apologetics with Sarah Waters and Gary Tandy. And then we're going to have a final giveaway at the very end for a full issue, year-long issue of the journal. So I think we should probably transition over to Joe and Sarah. Okay, see you in a sec.
Hi, sorry, I'm not very technically minded. I was muted. I'm very sorry about that. But welcome everyone, and thank you for being here with us. We're really excited to talk to you a bit about the special issue on Shakespeare, Shakespeare and cultural apologetics, and the different ways that our authors have dialogued with this in creative and critical, and in all kinds of different shapes and forms that you can find in the journal that Zach and Carla were just talking about. Some of the ways that we've set up some of the questions in the journal will work much better if you go ahead and buy a copy of it. So you should definitely buy a copy. But you can also access it right now online, and there's some really exciting pieces, some of which we're going to be previewing and talking about in this afternoon session. Not all of our authors are going to be here this afternoon, and so there's other cool stuff that you can also find within the journal. And of course, in half an hour segments, there's no way we can get to all the exciting things that you can find, even in the authors who are here. So that's a nice kind of way to give you an insight, a flavor, if you like, of what's in the journal, without meaning that, you just think, okay, well, I already know what's in the journal right now. I don't need to go ahead and read it. So this should be a nice kind of thing for that. I'll take you through some of the different pieces that we have in the journal, just to give you an idea of kind of how it works and what we were envisaging behind it. And at some point, my co-guest editor will join me and tell you a bit more about the kind of rationale behind how we were framing Shakespeare and how he intersects with cultural apologetics, and the ways that can be interesting, problematic, difficult, weird, crazy, and other things too. Some of which you got a flavor of in our call for papers or call for submissions, which came up much earlier this year. And in the introduction, Joe talks quite a lot about the way that we're thinking about that in the issue, and the way that our different authors engage with that too. And I'll leave him to talk more about that when he rejoins us. But in the issue, what we did was we included some pieces that were other authors who are not alive anymore, or who might be still alive, who were not our submitters, who also are engaging with Shakespeare. And
wait, Sarah.
Apologetics.
Sarah, you didn't know that George MacDonald actually submitted?
I did not.
No. Yeah, he just did it personally to me. He didn't know your email.
Okay, there we go.
So yeah, so people will be happy to know that. I think he's going to appear later if I can get my fright wig. He's going to appear a little later in the discussion. Maybe not. Okay. I missed everything you said so far, just so you know, because I was off trying to come back in.
That's fine.
It worked amazingly. Okay.
So I was saying that you might talk a little bit about how we were framing Shakespeare and cultural apologetics, because you talk about that in the introduction.
Well, yeah. And it's a super interesting topic, isn't it? I mean, cultural apologetics itself. And so everybody, and I know Carla, I already heard her talking about that in the previous session. And that's a very interesting topic. Holly Ordway calls something, maybe it's the same thing, maybe it's slightly different, imaginative apologetics. But it's, and I am always, I'm wary of apologetics in general. I mean, like, I love it. I eat it for lunch. I love Lewis and all this stuff, but then I'm wary of arguments and or things that don't make sense to me. And so the imaginative or cultural apologetics, I've always wanted to write a book on, it was going to be called Rock Apologetics. It was about rock and roll and looking at apologetics, using it in an apologetic way, which I guess was cultural apologetics before we were calling it that. And so it was kind of an experiment too, to really get inside this, right? I mean, I know we both enjoyed it a lot, and I think a lot of our authors did as well. And some kind of send us messages in the middle of things like, what's cultural apologetics again? Like, I'm halfway through this article, but, and we kept, and as you know, Sarah, a lot of our feedback was like, well, this is really great. Now, can you try to relate this more specifically to cultural apologetics? And then we'd say, well, we're not sure what it is, but can you do that? And no, we all have some sense of it. But so, yeah, Shakespeare, obviously, the larger topic would be Shakespeare and religion. That's been a big topic for a long time. And so, as one things I tried to do in the introduction to two was I say, well, this is that, but it's not just that. It's a little different. It's not just saying, well, Shakespeare reflects religion of his day, which he does. And Shakespeare talks about religion in his texts, which he does. But how might we read Shakespeare and whether not forcing our opinion onto him, but an experience of seeing a play or reading a book, how that might work. And I'm also interested in how it might not work, like how we can overstate things. As you know, I push back a lot about Portia's speech on mercy in Merchant of Venice, which could be cultural apologetics with a capital CA. But the play itself complicates that. And so we wanted to not only look at Shakespeare and cultural apologetics, but look at cultural apologetics in a way that how do we deal, and we didn't solve that, but we just raised the issue. How do we deal with some of these complications? You see a movie that has a gorgeous sky and you say, that makes me think of God and makes me, and therefore is apologetic. And then something else, the very next scene, is really it makes that concept difficult or complicated. And we wanted to be true to both. And part of that, I think, is being true. I've always thought that I know where I was teaching for a long time, your responsibility is to your students. And I said, that's right. And my responsibility is also to Shakespeare and the guild, the scholarly guild, people who have invested their lives in really trying to understand this stuff. And we can't take it like fast and easy. So, that was you could tell I've been driving for the last hour and a half in a traffic jam, and I'm a little hyper, but I'm also hyper always talking about this topic. So, but did that answer it, Sarah? Or
yeah, no, that's super helpful. I think that's right.
Ask you a hard question now.
You can if you want.
Tell me about your response to the collection of essays that we had. Of course, I won't right now talk about poetry because you're going to be doing that in 10 minutes or 5. But what's your feeling about that? Is in terms of an introduction, our editor's introduction, where we collected a bunch of essays. By the way we did it, we sent out a call every way we knew how on Facebook. You did it on Twitter, I think.
Yep.
No Twitter. email. So and then we came up with things. How do you feel about where we are, where we landed on all that?
I guess this kind of connects to what you were saying before, but I like the diversity and the true sense of that term that we have with the different essays, in that they're all kind of meandering around towards within cultural apologetics, but in different ways.
Yeah.
And so they intersect really nicely in ways that perhaps weren't necessarily immediately obvious when we were going through the editing process. Some of them were obvious, the way they connect, and some of them less so.
Yeah.
But I think as everyone was kind of grappling with, well, how do we think about Shakespeare in this way? What are we doing with his plays, with his poetry, with his words, with his characters and ideas? And what are we trying to convey to our audience, and what does our audience look like? And so I think we've got such a range of different responses to the question, to that big overarching question, some of which were exactly what I was hoping for, some of which were things I could never have hoped for because I wouldn't have predicted it, and some other stuff that hasn't been written yet, which I'm quite glad about, because that means that other stuff can happen in the future. So
I hope he's not listening right now. No, I hope he is. I hope he's right here. But John D. Cox, who's one of the leading Shakespeare scholars in the United States, and especially issues of Shakespeare and religion, especially issues of early drama and religion. And he writes an essay about paradoxical Shakespeare, which he says Shakespeare's not religious, he's secular. And, so that was something for us to say, let's include that. Because ultimately he does more than that, and he shows where Shakespeare's religious, and he even shows Shakespeare doing cultural apologetics in a way, and he mentions it specifically. But he's saying, we've got to be careful with Shakespeare. He's religious. Everyone's religious, John says, in that period. But he's also secular, and I actually push back against John a little bit. But that's a nice grounding. I thought, have that in the middle, but also of course, Gary Cantandy's essay, which we'll talk about later today. We decided to start off with that because it's just so gospel, it seems to me, and I don't think anyone's ever pointed that out quite so specifically about that aspect of King Lear. I think. So anything else, Sarah, that we should talk about? I mean, it's obviously an interesting, I suppose I would just say we hope people will get it. Penn Hackney has already said he's buying the whole issue because the year's subscription is worth getting. It's a way to go. I just saw that in the chat, but, what did you hope to see, and what did we end up with,
Yeah, I mean, I guess I kind of like that we don't necessarily agree with all our authors, because it would be a boring world if we did. And I think it also shows how open for discussion this kind of topic is as well. And it's a contentious topic in lots of ways to be talking about Shakespeare in conjunction with religion. You talk about
in the larger world,
yeah, absolutely. And I feel like our contributors acknowledge that, but also push back at that in different ways as well, which is great. And yeah, I mean,
probably some of the normal readers and stuff for the usual readers on Unexpected Journal don't know. It's sort of dangerous. Even I took that word out of my essay, dangerous, the dangerous adventure we were involved, which is Shakespeare and religion, and trying to make a case. Because I mentioned a similar book that's come out recently edited by Hannibal Hamlin, who knows more about the Bible and Shakespeare than anyone I know. But he says, none of our authors, I don't know what any of their religious, affiliations are. Except I think Rowan Williams. I think I know his because he's in the book. But everyone else, he just says it wasn't an issue. They're just scholars looking at Shakespeare and religion. So this is a little different. And and therefore a challenge. I mean, if it's a group that all believes that already, fine. But we're hoping to have, and I think Always Apologetics hopes to have a larger audience. And I think I need to clear out of here because you're going to do some things with some poets here in a minute. And not sorry we didn't just mention them, but I know they're going to be mentioned now. Where I just should say, we should say we conceived of this, and of course Zach and Jason had said just because of it, with poetry, with creative work, with short pieces, and we did try to elicit some other things. Connor's review essay is a little different than the other essays, and it's just fantastic. And the poems we're very happy with, the short letters from Will Shakespeare, and other things. So it's kind of a cornucopia, to coin a phrase, and has a lot of different stuff in it, and also a very cool layout, which we're very thankful for the folks who put that together. But I'll sign off, or somebody will probably sign me off, I hope, since I don't. Last time I tried to do anything, I completely lost everything. So if somebody can get me out of this box, and I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Hello everyone, welcome back. So I'm here now with our poet contributors to the journal, and we're going to talk a little bit about the creative pieces and the way that they grapple with Shakespeare and cultural apologetics. I have forewarned them, so hopefully no one is too terrified by that. What I thought would be sensible to do first of all is just to go around, and I'm going to get you to introduce yourselves, if that's okay, rather than me butchering your biographies. And I am terrible with organization, so I've suggested that we go in alphabetical order, which requires me to do no work, and you two will just figure out the alphabetical order. If you're not sure, it was on my email yesterday. But so that's starting with Corey. So if you just want to tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, that kind of thing, and then we'll think a bit more about Shakespeare after that, and we'll go around in order without me interrupting, if that's okay.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
So my name's Corey Latta. I'm assistant professor of English and the Humanities at Labouré College. I'm the author of C.S. Lewis and the Art of Writing, as well as some other works. I'm a wannabe poet, and what else? Let me think. I'm a PhD in 20th century modernist literature, focused on the Inklings and the works of C.S. Lewis, and that's it for now.
Hi, I'm Crystal Hurd. I'm a teacher and a professor at Northwind Theological Seminary in their Inklings program and their master's in faith and the arts. I'm also the author of C.S. Lewis, The Leadership of C.S. Lewis, which came out this spring, and a devotional. And I'm currently working on a book on the Lewis and Hamilton families and sort of how C.S. Lewis's families influenced his artistic and spiritual development. So it's great to be here.
I'm Jennifer Woodruff Tate. You forced me to think about the alphabet. And I also, if you saw me looking to the side, I had forgotten to turn my phone ringer off. I'm the editor of Christian History Magazine. I am prepared with a cover of our Lewis issue, which Crystal is in, with some of her research on the Hamilton Lewis families. And I have a degree in American church history, which has nothing to do with either Shakespeare or C.S. Lewis. And I'm an Episcopal priest. And I published a lot of poetry a long time ago, and not very much recently until this. So.
Hi, I'm John Stanifer. I have a Master of Arts in English, and I've been working at Ivy Tech Community College in Kokomo, Indiana for about 13 years now. I'm basically the librarian there and everything but name only. That's not my official position, but I do pretty much everything related to the library, and we do tutoring for English and math and so forth too. I've also been picking up an associate's in cybersecurity, so probably within the next 6 months to a year, I'll be moving into a job in the IT field, depending on what I can find.
Okay, I remember to unmute myself this time. That's perfect. Thank you very much. So I thought it would be interesting to hear a little bit about your first encounter with Shakespeare, or if you prefer, your Shakespeare play. I hate that question, but you might like that question. Or just to give us a kind of flavor of how you first encountered Shakespeare or engaged with Shakespeare before we transition to then hearing a bit more about your pieces. We're going to stick with alphabetical order because now everyone knows the order. Either attack that however you like. First encounter with Shakespeare, that could be a play, it could be a poem, it could be both, or your favorite of the above.
So I managed my undergrad's in biblical studies and theology, and I managed to make it through high school and all of undergrad without ever having completed a Shakespeare play, to my shame. And I get to grad school and I'm doing my second master's in English, and I get to a Shakespeare class, and my professor is a guy named, he's deceased now, Nahib Shaheen, who wrote Biblical Allusions in Shakespeare, and pretty famous work. And he asked one question that caused me to fall in love with Shakespeare. He asked, why is Shakespeare? And all of us, grad students sort of fumbled for various answers. And he said, Shakespeare because he touches the shore of every human experience. And from that moment, I was like, I'm in. And I just sort of started devouring. But that was my first. I was 26 years old.
I guess I met Shakespeare through the generous contributions of the taxpayers of this local place here in Bristol, Virginia, where I'm from, because I remember reading Romeo and Juliet in 9th grade, which is in our curriculum. And I actually teach, my day job is teaching dual enrollment, British literature, and creative writing at the high school that I grew up in. So I'm actually teaching in the classroom that I took freshman English in. So the classroom I fell in love with Shakespeare in is where I'm teaching now, which is really cool. And I just remember being like, wow, this is really complicated. But when you actually, broke it apart and started reading it, you could see sort of the beauty and the skill behind everything. And so I had to read it every year except for my junior year, which is American Lit. And then I went to college, took a Shakespeare class in college. And then in my master's program, I took a class on Shakespeare and appropriation, which was how people appropriate Shakespeare to their generation, to their cultural context, to their spiritual context. So that was an amazing class, and it really showed me the longevity sort of and the robustness of Shakespeare's world and how it continues to inspire people, challenge people. My favorite play is Hamlet, as you can see up here. I'm actually in my bedroom, but this is Waterhouse's Ophelia, which is my favorite painting. So I get to watch her hang out every day. But Ophelia, when I was in my master's, we talked about the possibility that she could be pregnant. There were some lines in there. And so sort of that whole idea of purity and, just the way she's treated really by a lot of people in the play was just really fascinating to me. So that's sort of, I know I'm sort of jumping the gun here, but that was sort of, why I've always loved Shakespeare, but I love Hamlet. It's my favorite.
So I also read Romeo and Juliet in 9th grade. And then when I was a sophomore, I ended up taking this English independent study. I don't have any idea why now. I did this, but basically this, lovely old professor, he was probably like 50, but, he seemed really old, who had taught the freshman lit. My parents were like, well, you're going to study independent study with Mr. Pomanier, and you can do anything you want. And I said, I want to read more Shakespeare and I want to learn Latin. So I walk in there to his office and he hands me Richard II. I opened it, old John of Gaunt-time, honored Lancaster. And Romeo and Juliet was fine, but I was hooked. I was Miss Shakespeare history plays at the age of 14, and I've never stopped being Miss Shakespeare history plays. And I love them very much. And when I was a senior in high school, I actually memorized Henry IV's monologue at the end of Henry IV Part 2 just because I wanted to, and I'm weird. So that's how I first fell in love with Shakespeare. My favorite play is The Winter's Tale, and since my poem has to do a lot about that, I can say some more about it later. I'm also a huge fan of Much Ado About Nothing, and although it is not my favorite play necessarily, I was in The Merchant of Venice and I got to play Portia, and I got to say that speech and have to think about all the problems that Joe mentioned earlier as being inherent in that speech when you actually have to perform it as part of a court brief. It contextualizes it in a way that I think people don't sort of, they extract it and say, mercy, lovely. This woman is not showing mercy at the moment. Anyway, I'm not here to talk about Merchant of Venice.
I think like everyone else, I probably read my first Shakespeare in high school. I remember we read Romeo and Juliet and Macbeth in my English class, but I don't think it really started to have an impact on me until I was an undergraduate at Indiana University, Kokomo. We read several more plays then, and I got to see live productions of Taming of the Shrew and Twelfth Night, and that was really neat. But I guess more so even than the original text of the plays themselves, I think it's fascinating the ways that filmmakers and other authors have spun off of Shakespeare's works over the years. I'm a huge nerd, and when I first saw the Star Wars Shakespeare series by Ian Doescher, I just thought those were great. And one year when I was attending a convention called Gen Con, I was in this event where you're up on stage, and it amounts to basically a game show or a stage play, and I was dressed in Jedi robes, and I was spouting lines from the Star Wars Shakespeare series, which basically combine lines from the movie and spin them into Shakespearean language, and then sometimes they'll just basically paraphrase lines directly from the plays. So I thought that was pretty neat. But if I had to pick a favorite play, it would probably be Henry V. And I love Kenneth Branagh's adaptation of it from the 80s, especially the battle at the end. I watched that with my dad years ago, and he described it as sort of a medieval version of Saving Private Ryan. It just really puts you in the dirt and the mud and the blood of the whole thing, and just really has an impact. And I especially love the Psalm 115 in Latin at the end, where they're singing it at the end of the battle. That's just such a beautiful piece, even without the imagery. Just listening to the words, it gets me every time I hear it. But yeah, I guess that would be my answer. I just love all the spin-offs and the ways people have adapted his works over the years.
That's great. Thank you all very much. I would have liked to have interrupted every time, but if I do that, we'll never get through anything. I'm sorry. But I'm enjoying the love for the history plays, which get slightly less love in general, I think. So that's quite nice. But I don't know. I think the first Shakespeare play you encounter, or the first kind of encounter you have with Shakespeare, has quite a significant impact for the way you then start conceptualizing him, I think. Not necessarily how you start conceptualizing him in terms of cultural apologetics, although if the person who first introduced you to Shakespeare happens to be the person who is the renowned authority on the Bible and Shakespeare, then maybe it has some kind of an impact. Okay, I'm going to shut up in a second because I would like our contributors to read a poem or a section of 2 poems, if you happen to submit 2, if you prefer to do it that way, so that you can get a flavor of the kind of writing that we've got in the issue. And then we're going to talk a little bit about that too. If you don't want to read your entire poem, that's also okay, if you want people to actually go ahead and read it themselves. So if you submitted more than one, then either pick your not necessarily favorite. Either pick the one you want to read, or you can pick a section from the 2. If you only submitted one, then you don't have that question to answer because you only have the one. I hope that makes sense. So again, we'll go ahead in the same order. And if you just go ahead and read the section that you'd like to read, that would be great.
Okay, I submitted 2, and these are 2 my 2 favorite Shakespeare plays Hamlet and Othello. So I'll just read the poem I wrote about Hamlet's, or from the perspective of Hamlet's father. I'm fascinated by this dynamic. So Carl Jung, the great psychoanalyst, said that the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of its parent. And I think about this opening scene where the ghost of Hamlet's father charges Hamlet with avenging his death and killing his uncle, and just the sort of the psychic weight that you see Hamlet bear throughout the play. It fascinates me. So I wrote a poem from the perspective of Hamlet's father. It goes like this. I walked this parapet when I had time, in the autumn when the fires lit the night watch, and the fir and spruce tops glowed. Days when I held my scepter, breath, and lady all with one hand. But lingering in this limbo, I have neither feet, hands, blood, crown, queen, or confession. My own cut short in the garden of my ambition. Now the sun tells me my time is up, but yours is not. So what, in all this cold and all this dark, will you do when I tell you a thing that will stand your neck hairs up and turn your young blood cold? What will you be? If ever I was a father to you, be a son to me. Thanks. I'll just stick with that one. I think this is the better of the two I wrote, but I am fond of bits of the Othello one, but I like this one better.
It pairs super nicely with the next person, so it was a good choice.
Oh, is it my turn? Yes. Yeah. So, sort of jumping off of Corey's idea of sort of like the strained relationships between fathers or stepfathers and sons. There was also just a really strange relationship, I think, between Ophelia and her father, who is a bit of a windbag in Hamlet. And seems to care more about his sort of place in society and among the king's, the king's opinion than he is of his own children and sort of their mental health. So, like I said, I've always sort of been fascinated with Ophelia and even her death, surrounded by the possibility that it could have been, self-inflicted, or the fact that, she has all these flowers, and those flowers have all these meanings that could be, pointing towards, towards some sort of untangling of her ideas. But so I sort of wrote mine about Ophelia and her. I had it pulled up, but here it comes. Sorry. Sort of in her death, and what does that mean? Denmark is stained with bruises of betrayal. Yet in her agony, she, mermaid-like, succumbed to the darker abyss. Flowers tangled in her hair, a song in her throat, pale, plundered. As the bow broke, hers was the greater tragedy. Oh, woe is me, she lamented, when lovers proved false and parent cunning, a neglected player in a tale of revenge and fawning fathers, abused, insulted, robbed of innocence. The nunnery is a fine place for one of such pure heart. Sorry, I just lost it there. And unswerving conscience. Perhaps she desired the wrong prince, or a father who would not parade her as a pawn, sought salvation not in the rivers of ravaged beauty, broken, but cloistered in the chapel. This isn't a romance where the rapids baptized her. Thirsty, they consumed all, swallowing weary wounds, an abbreviated life. If only she had recognized reality in the ragged seams of Hamlet unbraced, or she had awakened from the slumber of contrariness and corruption, poison and pantomimes, lords and liars, and clung to a different savior, maybe it would have been different. God have mercy on all Christian souls, especially on those worthy of a happy ending, on her sweet and gentle spirit. And that last And that last stanza is the last words that she speaks in the play.
Crystal,
Thanks
you
so
have
much.
choked me up, and now I have to read my poem. My favorite poem, my favorite play, as I said, is The Winter's Tale. When I went to college and became an English major, I had the great good fortune to take lots and lots of Shakespeare with a wonderful professor who was very into both understanding the text, but also performance practice. And we watched everything that we studied, not live necessarily, but we watched like the BBC productions and things like that. But I did see I saw the BBC Lear with Laurence Olivier as Lear on VHS because I'm old, and then I saw The Winter's Tale live, and I was just bowled over. And so I was 18 when I wrote this poem. I'm now 51, and I just could not stop running the end of Lear and the end of The Winter's Tale parallel, where, and I'm already primed to cry, Crystal, where you've got Lear putting the feather on Cordelia's lips to see if she lives and there's no breath. And then you've got The Winter's Tale, and you've got the statue of Hermione, and Leonte's there, and then he sees breath. And that just blows me away. And when we're all done, you should go read Shakespeare's poem called Hermione in the House of Paulina, which is a much better poem about the Winter's Tale than mine. But I wrote this thing where I just ran them with each other, and it's one of the two that's in the issue. And I'm going to read it. Lear cries out in darkness for his love, parting each cloud to touch the clouds beneath. He tears apart the gods to find the skies alone with foolishness upon the heath. Cordelia, return, do not die now or ever on that stage. The feather stirs. O Lear, she lives, transformed. Hermione, who heals her husband's rage. Into a world with its own mind-blown heaths and jealous tyrants, healing finds a birth. We tear apart the skies and find the gods are ruling and forgiving still on earth. Behind both God and sky, the master pen is scripting out each universe at will. Cordelia dead, Hermione reborn. Which is the final answer? Bend your quill and tell us that behind these lifetimes shaped by godlike powers that art laid in your hand, there is a power of love, surpassing art, who scripts this life we cannot understand.
So when I was trying to decide on a subject for my poem, I think around the same time, I had been listening to the audio version of Bill Bryson's book on Shakespeare, and he has a section where he talks about all the theories throughout the years of other people that supposedly could have written the plays of Shakespeare other than William Shakespeare. And I just find it interesting how over the centuries that kind of attitude has persisted, that, let's find anybody other than William Shakespeare who could have written the plays. And then I thought that would be an interesting topic because you have kind of a parallel in biblical studies where there are endless debates about certain books of the Bible that have more ambiguous human authorship. And I connected those two in my head. And then I've always liked in the 1995 Emma Thompson Sense and Sensibility, they recite Sonnet 116, Willoughby and Marianne connect through that. So I memorized that years ago. And then I'm like, hey, I could paraphrase that and turn it into like a meditation on Shakespearean authorship. So that was the tack that I took with my first of the two poems. And then the other one turns it into more onto the Bible. And then so my first poem is more about Shakespearean authorship, and the other one is about biblical authorship, and how really in both cases you can get so hung up on all these different theories about who wrote what, and it just sort of misses the point in the end, because it's more about the impact that the work has on people's spiritual and emotional lives than it is about exactly which human author wrote which text. So, I mean, I just think so many scholarly debates are a distraction in that way. And I like the idea of bringing the focus back onto the impact the work has on people. So I'll just read the first poem, which is the one that paraphrases Sonnet 116. Let us not, to the questioning of authorship, admit significance. Will is still will, regardless which new theories advanced, denying Stratford's son his due respect. Oh no, it is a never fixed voice that wrote The Tempest and joined the good king's men. He is the ink to every scholar's pen, whose worth's unknown, although degrees be taken. Will's not time's fool, though critics' thoughts and tastes within its bending sickle's compass come. Will alters not with their brief hours and weeks, but bears his maker's gift, the fairest words. If this be error, and I should prove mistaken, will read Will still, although his name be Bacon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for reading reading your poems. I'm very much of the opinion that poetry, in lots of ways, is so good how to land. So it's great to have the opportunity to be able to do that, and even better from the authors themselves. I'm going to throw the hard question out because we have 5 minutes left. So here's a hard question. You all knew it was coming, so hopefully it's not a horrible surprise. But and I guess I'll open it up so that we don't have to go in any kind of particular order. So just go ahead and unmute if you want to talk. There might be chaos. I'm okay with that. Hopefully you are too. But thinking about how your poem or poems engage with the question of Shakespeare and cultural apologetics. There's the hard question. Hopefully not too tricky. But some of you have already touched on this a little bit, actually, when you were talking through the kind of thinking behind your poem or poems. But yeah, how do you see your creative pieces or piece engaging with Shakespeare and cultural apologetics? There we go. Chaos ensued.
Well, I can go first because I'm in such a different place in my life than I am. I mean, now than when I wrote those poems. And, when I shared them on Facebook, when the issue came out, I said, I'm not really sure what cultural apologetics is. I think it's just making art because Jesus. But when I wrote the poems, I was more interested in classical apologetics. And so that's more obvious actually in this poem than in the other one I submitted, which was in the voice of Jaques from As You Like It. But so as you could see at the end of that, I'm actually asking apologetic question, the problem of evil. And it's essentially the whole, I always forget what's the Sestine and what's the other thing. But anyway, the whole last part of the sonnet is asking the question of the problem of evil. And so when Joe said, we want poems on Shakespeare and culture apologetics, I'm like, well, when I was a young evangelical instead of an old Episcopalian, I wrote this poem where the end of it asks the question about the problem of evil. So that's, I think, how that engages it. The Jaques one is way harder, and people should just go read it and make up their own minds about that. So
that's great.
I guess I've sort of talked a little bit about mine and sort of like where did Ophelia end up in eternity, right? Like did she invalidate, her salvation by taking her own life? The song actually was inspired by a band that my husband and I love called Me Without You. They have a song called Dormouse Sighs. And I was listening to it one night while I was teaching Hamlet. And there's a line in there that says, one day my prince will come, one day my prince will come. Of course, the song is actually about Jesus. And so, in my brain, I was sort of like, I bet Ophelia's life would have been completely different if she had not sort of surrendered to, the sort of cultural ideas of love and devotion to this man, and sort of just, and because a nunnery, she would have been a lot better off. I mean, she would have still been alive, right? If she had went to a nunnery. So yeah, and she just, to me, she just seems like a square peg in a round hole because she's around all these really sort of villainous, terrible characters, and who are really selfish and very, just arrogant, and even her own boyfriend, kind of treats her like crap, So to me, it was sort of like that idea of like where where do we go in eternity? And, you know, even though works, you know, don't determine anything, you know, she was the better character, you know, was the nicer, better character, more moral character of a lot of the other ones. So, you know, does that invalidate everything she did? You know, so I was just sort of toying with that question. I just thought it was interesting. So
That's great. Thank you.
I feel like I sort of covered a lot of the thought process behind mine, but I would add that I think it would be easy for a lot of Christians to be discouraged if there are questions left unanswered about who wrote Job or Hebrews or any of the other books that have controversial authorship. But again, I just feel like I wanted to draw attention to the fact that that isn't really the point in the end. So, and of course, you can only do so much in the space of a few lines, but I was happy with how it turned out.
That's great. Thank you.
The question of cultural apologetics, I think Jennifer, I sort of share your sentiment, like, what is it exactly? And I consider myself an apologist of sorts, and have written a lot of apologetic works, released essays on apologetics. Sorry, too, if there's background noise. I think the human condition is an apologetic. So going back to Shaheen's quote, you know, that Shakespeare sort of touches the shore of every human experience. I think in terms of, you know, what Scripture lays out and how we're designed, the nature of the fall, what redemption consists of, all the sort of the struggles that we endure in sort of in our spiritual lives, our emotional lives, our relational lives. I think, you know, Shakespeare, perhaps greater than any other author, depicts all of that beautifully and that depiction is an apologetic, like it sort of points to design. It points to the very relational makeup that Scripture so often affirms. And when I wrote, and I often find myself doing this, when I wrote my poem, I didn't really want to lay heavy theological tracks or motifs on it. I just sort of wanted it to be what it was. I think about William Carlos Williams as no ideas but in things, and I sort of wanted to take that approach to the sentiments of Hamlet's father or Othello. And somehow, to me, that sort of does the job of an apologetic piece.
I wish we could talk about all of this stuff for ages, but we can't. I'm sorry. But this has been great. Thank you all so much for being here and for submitting your creative pieces as well to this issue. Everyone should go ahead and read them right now. Well, not right now, but soon. Because right now we're going to transition to the next panel. So thank you all so much for your time, for being here, and for all your submissions.
Here we are. All right. Let's get going, shall we? Hello, Lou. So good to see you. I think maybe you are frozen, but if I can hear your voice, that would be great. Are you there, Lou? Not quite hearing you. Okay, well, we're good. We'll move on. Tracy Manning is here with us from Frozen, Indiana. And good to see you, Tracy. And G. Connor Salter from somewhere in Colorado. Last I knew, but I could be wrong about that. And Lou, are you here?
I'm there. Okay.
I hear you. Great. Okay, good. So this is Shakespeare and portrayals. That's our general topic, because these weren't really the critical essays, as it were. They were more about dramatizing something with Shakespeare. In Connor's case, he reviewed films of Macbeth. Tracy is a theater director and professor, and Lou wrote 2 letters. This is for our readers. Lou knows what he did. He wrote more than 2 letters. He wrote many letters from Shakespeare to his modern audiences, taking Shakespearean ideas and putting them into letters from Will Shakespeare. And we included 2 of those in the contribution. So thanks for being here, everyone. And let's get right down to it. First of all, I'm going to ask you each to introduce yourselves very briefly, and especially kind of how your work might touch on William Shakespeare. And well, we'll get into cultural apologetics in a minute. So Lou, you go first if your sound is working. Okay. I don't know if there's a big delay or whatever, but I'm going to move on. And Connor, why don't you go ahead? I'm
not sure if anyone can hear me. I can only hear about 10%. Now I can't hear anything.
Yeah. Zach, could we just mute
I just
Lou
keep getting
and work on
knocked
something?
off here. I don't know if anyone can hear me.
We hear you saying, can we hear you? Did you hear my question?
I'll mute myself.
Okay. Connor, go ahead.
All right. Yes, I'm Connor Salter. I'm an editor. I live in Colorado.
Can you hear me now? Give me a thumbs up.
Yes. Go ahead, Connor.
Okay. And yes, my essay was just interacting with the question of how do you get very different takes on the morality and the metaphysics in Macbeth, depending on what you emphasize in a given movie adaptation.
Mm-hmm. And what's your normal? What do you do most of the time, Connor? What are your? I know you have a degree in professional writing, and now you're a professional writer. Tell me some of the stuff that you're working on other than Shakespeare.
All right. So yes, my day job is I mostly write religious content for several websites. So sort of who was Cain's wife? Do we know kind of thing? And
serious apologetic questions.
Yes. And yeah, I've done some Inklings work that's been submitted to different academic journals over the years. I had a piece published in the most recent issue of Mythlore on
Bravo.
C.S. Lewis comparing some of his work to a filmmaker named Terence Fisher.
Yeah. And you developed that work at Taylor University, didn't you? That's where you got started on it.
That's correct.
Well, that leads me to our next panelist here, Tracy Manning, who is, well, Tracy, I know what you are, but why don't you go ahead and tell us what you do there at Taylor and also, about your vocation.
Sure. I'm Tracy Manning. I'm chair of the Department of Music, Theater, and Dance at Taylor University and artistic director of theater there. And every once in a while, I direct a Shakespeare play. I think cultural apologetics are probably always a part of my consideration, and teaching the way that I think about and read plays through the lens of my faith is just part and parcel of my day-to-day life and work. So this was just the interview with the editors was just an extension of that and an articulation of it. So
thanks.
Yeah.
Now, so the first sort of, and Tracy, I have directed Tracy, and she has directed me, but she only directed me as an old cowboy in Oklahoma.
Yeah, only a little bit.
I wanted her to direct me in King Lear, but we didn't get there.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask both of you to give a brief description of your contribution and maybe read what you consider the most important paragraph. Did you guys get that part of, because it wasn't me who was going to read it. Okay. So Connor, you go ahead and describe a little more detail what you actually submitted, because you said, well, I talked about the way different people looked at Macbeth and adapted it, but it's a little more specific than that, and quite wonderful actually, I think, and quite thorough. But also then if you want to describe your contribution, and if you have a passage you'd like to read, please go ahead. This would be a good time for that.
All right. So yes, my essay was getting into the question of part of cultural apologetics is what vision does a work cast about what really matters. So what is moral, what is immoral, natural, supernatural, how do they interact? And of course, Macbeth is a story about a murder. So that creates very particular consequences. I think I'm going to read, I think this is one of my intro paragraphs, which sort of sums up how I was going about that in the essay. Adapting a text for film necessarily involves deciding which material to maintain or omit, including religious references. For example, a director may depict the three witches as hallucinations or women who genuinely have supernatural powers. Directors not only make choices about how much of a text's material to include in the film, they, consciously or not, make choices that, intentionally or not, direct religious imagery. In other words, different Macbeth adaptations create different cultural apologetics. They may even suggest various different religious systems. For this essay, I will discuss the 5 major film adaptations of Macbeth, considering how each one engages with the religious content of Shakespeare's play, and in terms of cultural apologetics, defined as the vision Shakespeare casts of a world ruled by Christian metaphysics and morality. The 5 films I talked about were the ones by Orson Welles, Akira Kurosawa, Roman Polanski, Justin Kurzel, and Joel Cohen. So each one looking at, okay, well, how did each of them depict the murder? How do each of them depict the comeuppance, etc., and how that fit?
Yeah, I like that. The comeuppance. That's a standard word in apologetics when we talk about guilt and morality, etc. But I like what you're saying here, and whatever Tracy may go a different direction, because I know her interest too, and it's super interesting. But I wonder if we, at least you and me, Connor, would push back a little bit against some of the artistes in the previous panel, some of the poet artistes who said, well, just whatever's there is apologetics, because this is the problem I have. Is that, well, there is a certain content to Christianity that is different than every other amorphous kind of thing that is just there. And sometimes we can point at it, but sometimes it's stated. And when you look at Shakespeare, there's a lot of different ways we can talk about cultural apologetics. And one is the wonder of something. And of course, that's just that points, right? That points it in an important way. But also when you start talking about sin, guilt, punishment, or redemption, these kinds of things, good and evil gods or good and evil powers. Yeah. So Macbeth deals with that. And then these 5 films do it in different ways. Tracy, you, we listen, all in all honesty, this interview didn't happen in person, did it? I sent you a bunch of questions, but you had already written some stuff as a kind of basis. And then I think that we decided that it worked better as an interview. But so Tracy, what about your contribution? I'd love you read your what you consider, it could just be your favorite paragraph. It doesn't have to be who says it's the most important. I don't know, but or just talk about your piece for a minute, if you would, Tracy. I appreciate it.
Yeah, maybe it helps to understand kind of the perspective I'm starting at, and so I'll read a little bit about that, what I believe about theater, and then I think it tangentially connects to Shakespeare in lots of ways. But this is near the end of the interview. I'd been asked as a theater professor how my approach to my vocation maybe differed from other directors or actors, and the ways in which my approach has this sort of has a pedagogy to it, right, and a sense of responsibility for students. And so, in part of that answer, I said this: Theater creates an environment where conversation can happen, where experience lies in the suspension of disbelief, and where the realities of the human condition are before our very eyes, living and breathing. Artistry is to creation as theology is to the Word of God. Practicing theology is the journey of discovering who God is. Experiencing art as a creator or as an audience member is the journey of discovering something of what it means to be human. If we understand that art is a powerful spiritual vocation, then we may approach it with the fearlessness and intentionality it requires. And I just think that gets a little bit to what I believe about doing what I do, the room I do it in, and the intentionality I try to do it with.
One of the things that I know from firsthand is the sense of also we know about Shakespeare is that his work was collaborative in an absolute major way. Now, perhaps sonnets were collaborative in that he was ripping off on other sonneteers, but in terms of the theater, his work was collaborative. I mean, you know, he had a guy named Fred who played all the lead parts. His name was really Richard Burbage, but let's just call him Fred. And, you know, where did Hamlet come from? Where did this role come from? To some degree, Fred, I've got a great one for you, man. You're going to love it, you know. And Fred says, no, not that. No, I'm not doing that. Change it. Did he? Probably, or to some degree, right? It's collaborative work. And some of the stuff, I just want to say like an ad to everybody who wants to read the journal, make sure you read Tracy's interview about this stuff too, about the collaborative work, like, because that's very Shakespearean. And I asked you a little bit, does this go over as a kind of model for, and that's a cultural apologetic, kind of a model of a way of living, a way of being, a way of learning true. And I don't know if you can quote yourself. I almost can what you said in the text. But what about that? You know, Shakespeare's work is really collaborative in a whole lot of ways, not just the acting company, but that's a big way.
Yeah.
In the same way, of course, then theater production is like that, but some are more collaborative than others,
Sure.
as we all know.
Yeah.
And yours are very collaborative. And how does that model something about that we could say Shakespeare models it and we want to model it and we learn from him or pick up on that?
Yeah, I really enjoyed trying to articulate some of this, Joe, and I think it's in part because I fear a little bit coming out of pandemic and our isolation and our sort of ways we even interact with art, streaming services, and now I can watch the National Theater production by myself in my living room in my own comfy chair. I have to pay for the subscription, right? But I don't have to pay for a ticket. I don't have to arrive at a certain time. I don't have to park in a particular place. And I really don't have to, right? I don't have to be annoyed with whoever's sitting in front of me laughing at the parts I don't think are funny, right? Like I can do it by myself. And so, and I think perhaps maybe even in sort of and I think I alluded to this in the interview, that I think as Westerners, we're particularly culprits of sort of the Marlboro man sort of identity of like, I can go out on my own and conquer the world.
That is really a dated reference.
I know, I'm sorry. But like, I think that we rob ourselves of the opportunity of discovering something that's true when we do it all alone, because then we only have our perspective. We only have our bias, our sense of what we're seeing. And I always learn more about a Shakespeare play when I interact with it with other artists. And things become illuminated that maybe I completely missed before, or I didn't even see until somebody else reads the play and creates a costume design, or somebody else reads the play and creates a soundtrack or underscore for moments of the play, that I, as the director, have sort of said, this is what I want to think about. This is how I'm thinking about the play. Now you go do your part. You go prepare your part, and then let's try to throw them all together and see what we can come to know by having worked together.
Yeah.
So I think the collaborative nature just makes me a better person. It makes me a better artist. It creates some humility in me that's good, and thoughtful. And I think that it helps us know better how to live in the world with other people.
Yeah. It's a lot of people don't understand about that you have somebody who's sort of mostly, even in a student production, mostly in charge of the music. Although if Joe Rickey is doing the direction, he may come in and say, no, we're doing this song. But who's in charge of the music, who's in charge of the set design, who's in charge of the lighting design, those are all like really, and I mentioned to you, I think in the quote unquote interview, that Kevin, who was suggested a certain lighting cue for Much Ado About Nothing that totally changed my complete idea about a scene we were doing, and it changed the scene. Totally.
I've been talking all weekend with a composer friend who's doing original compositions for Taylor's production of Macbeth. It's going to happen in the winter, and what he's bringing to the table is informed by how I'm thinking about the play, but I'm not telling him what to compose. That's not my strength. What I'm hoping is that together we create like a meaningful, epistemological, thoughtful experience for actors and audiences, and that it's better than if I did it by myself.
In terms of performance, I mean, this is such an interesting thing about Shakespeare, because we have Lewis said, I know Sarah has mentioned this one to me, Sarah Waters, that, there's somewhere where Lewis says, yeah, performance, yeah. He kind of liked a few performances, but he was sort of, we all know that the book is the thing. And that's not really true to Shakespeare. It really isn't. It may be all we have until we put it into performance. And we should do everything we can to study the performances, the Shakespearean performance style. But still, it's like, it's not just what's written down on the page. There's so much more. And that's very interesting. And I do think that's a very interesting cultural apologetics issue for us. I'm going to get to Connor. I want to talk to Connor for a minute, if I may, and ask about, Connor, some interesting discoveries you made along the way. I know that there's that thing in Joel Cohen's thing about the leaves and about the forest and all that. And you might want to talk about that. And I think maybe I'm also super interested in that one you wrote about where Macbeth and Lady Macbeth seem to maybe have a child or two. But so if you want to talk about those, some of the more interesting things that you found out, digging through, you told me you watched every film, but also then you read pretty deeply in the literature about them. Go ahead.
Yeah. So yes, I watched all the films, and there was a lot of research back and forth, trying to sometimes double check to make sure that I was moving in a good direction. One of the big surprising insights was in Joel Cohen's version of Macbeth. He does this thing where Cohen felt that the Birnam Wood coming to Dunsinane had never been done well on film. So his solution is we have a shower of tree leaves that come crashing into the throne room, attacking Macbeth. And this, in a bizarre way, it parallels a comment that Tolkien made in 1955 to W.H. Auden about Tolkien was really disappointed that Birnam Wood doesn't come to Dunsinane, and that becomes Tolkien's inspiration for the scene in Lord of the Rings where the Ents march on Isengard. It's a riff on that kind of, okay, we're going to really have a forest attack a castle. And yes, that in Cohen's film, that just becomes interesting because it fits into, there's always these scenes of people seeing nature do odd things or react to their actions, which seems to fit into that idea of natural creation and the supernatural realm are reacting to whatever is going on here. So as if creation is groaning at Macbeth's.
I love that point because Tolkien, I thought, was just griping and saying Shakespeare didn't work like me. But, if we look at the larger picture, there is all this natural stuff. And I know that's Tracy has that vision too about the play, all this natural stuff going on. And then the woods is a bunch of guys dressed up with leaves on their heads. Instead, those of you who haven't seen it, Joel Cohen just has these leaves come rushing in like from the forest, like they're sort of attacking the castle. Is that, I've only seen it twice, but is that kind of, am I right there, Connor? I have this image in my head. Yeah.
Yes.
Now, what about the Kurzel film, which to me was the one I'd never heard of and was super, super interesting. Tell us about that, if you would.
Yes, you're right. I think Kurzel's version, which came out in 2015, kind of came and went. It did not do very well financially. But anyway, his big innovation is he starts the play with the two Macbeths burying a dead child. And it's an infant. And then we go slowly from that, we go more into the conventional play stuff. We've got the witches talking, then we've got the big battle. And we have this very small scene, which one scholar pointed out it appears to be Macbeth helping his teenage son. There's this teenage soldier that he's helping get ready for the battle. And then we see that teenage soldier dead at the end. And then still later, that teenage soldier appears as a ghost to give Macbeth the dagger. And then even still later in the movie, we've got Lady Macbeth having one of her big monologues, and we see she's talking to what appears to be a ghost of the dead infant from the first scene. So we have this implication here that it's like the Macbeths are grieving parents. They've lost at least one child, possibly two. And now those children are haunting them as they're lusting after power to replace parental trauma. They're grieving. They're going to get something to replace the grief.
And because forever not forever, for a long time in criticism, there's been this issue about, there was a question, how many children has Lady Macbeth? But that was a facetious question by scholars, by saying you're asking too many questions that aren't in the play. But why don't they have any children? And this is just, but of course, if the director doesn't do anything with that, but I think you've convinced me this is kind of a ghost story, and I really want to see it now. I don't know how to get a hold of it, but maybe is it on Amazon Prime or anything like that?
Yeah, it should be. It's pretty easy to find.
Okay.
I think it was. Yeah.
The director's name for everyone is Kurzel, Kurzel. I wanted to ask also, Tracy, I know you liking the really serious stuff, the serious, hard stuff, deals with the tough issues, all that kind of stuff. And yet you love A Midsummer Night's Dream.
I do. Yeah.
You love it. Tell me about that and what just your great love for that play.
I think to take something that is as sort of like commonplace and mundane as like romantic love, which is like the seed of the play, that it is turned out every day in all the Hallmark Christmas movies or whatever, and take this thing of our everyday life, and not that it's mundane, it's lovely, and we hope everyone in the world has romantic love as part of their story in some way, right? I don't mean to be
with fairies,
with fairies, but to take something like that and blow it out in this complexity and give us room to laugh at ourselves and laugh at our own folly when it comes to the emotional landscape, trying to navigate the emotional landscape of our life, I think and to see how ridiculous we can be when our feelings are the driver, I think is fascinating. And I just think it's so funny. I think it's so funny. Laugh out loud funny for me. Yeah.
And profound in its own way. And I always say, I laugh at the people who don't laugh at it, or like the whole kind of scholarship that says, well, let's get, that's a lightweight thing. And now let's look at the important stuff. you know,
Yeah, but
fairies. You
but
don't
we
take fairies for granted.
no, and we
That's bad.
can't even, I think the thing he did was he said, okay, yeah, laugh at my play. And while your mouth's open, I'll shove the important stuff down your throat. Like,
Yeah.
I think, to like borrow from Harold Clurman. I mean, I think that while our mouths are open laughing, we go, oh, gulp. Yeah. Like, that was me. And oh
anyway,
my. Yeah.
This has been brilliant. I love you guys. Thank you so much. I want to mention we also had Anthony Lawton, who is a very fine actor from Philadelphia, who has his interview with him in the work, and he's really interacted with Shakespeare quite a bit and has some really interesting ideas. He's the most hardcore of the cultural apologists of all. And also Lou Marcus, who was actually here with us today, and we could not get that to work, but he wrote these lovely letters from Shakespeare. One is on fools, so it pairs with Jack Keller's piece, which is coming up in a minute, and one is on love, so it kind of fits with a lot of different things. But thanks so much, Tracy. Thanks so much, Connor. And if the host will just get us off and bring the next scene on, as in Shakespearean style, we'd be much obliged.
Thank you, Joe.
Sorry, Carla, you're muted. Okay, well, I guess I will begin talking then. All right, thank you, everyone. That was an amazing first two sessions. And I hope that you've been learning a little bit more about the kind of work that we do in cultural apologetics, because it's a complex field, and it's one that's not always understood very well. And so I hope that in this issue, hopefully we can share a little bit more about that with you. But now that we're in a brief intermission, as you saw on that last video, we have a giveaway for you. And we want to get a copy of this issue in your hands. So one of the easiest ways to do that is to simply, if you're watching on Facebook or on YouTube, wherever you might be watching, type in #TheBard. So that's all you have to do, #TheBard. And we will randomly select one of those people, obviously, to win a free print issue that will be coming out in the very near future. And while you're doing that, #TheBard, I want to tell you about a few other things about our journal. So you may wonder if the journal is for you. You've liked what you've seen today. You like hearing about this stuff. However, maybe you want to try it out first. So if you sign up for our newsletter, right there on the screen, you can receive a free digital edition of our first ever issue, which was on the abolition of man. As you might be able to tell, a lot of us really like C.S. Lewis. And so, again, you can try it. A digital copy will be emailed to you, and you can find out, is this really for me? Obviously, all of our content is also freely available on our website. So if you want to know more about Connor's article or Tracy's interview, any of the poems that you heard, or Joe and Sarah's articles, by all means, and unexpectedjournal.com, and you will love to check that out, I'm sure. Another thing we'd love to talk about is where you can find print issues of our book. Because again, you can buy them on Amazon, you can buy them on barnesandnoble.com, but some people, and we found a lot of our readers, love independent bookstores a lot. And we're very excited. It's Day Books in Wichita has come outside and started stocking issues of an unexpected journal. So it's very cool to be able to walk into a bookstore, pull it off the shelf, look at it yourself. This Shakespeare issue, they're all beautiful, honestly. And so this will be shipping there in the near future as well. So you'll be able to, check that out. Obviously, you can buy from them online too. As we know that, some people honestly prefer to support the small bookstore rather than support the mega chains or Amazon, the overtaker of everything ever. So that's something really important to remember about that. And also, just one more thing I do want to mention is, okay, we're a 501c3 nonprofit. Obviously, your donations help make this possible. And if you want to donate to us today, you can do that by texting, as you can see on the screen, AUJ launch to the number 53555, or you can do it right on our website. And again, we love doing this, honestly. If you weren't on earlier and you didn't hear Harla talking about this, our first issue launched in 2018. It was April 2nd, 2018. So we've been doing 5 complete years of this now. That's 20 issues of the journal. And we love doing it, and it's really exciting for us. And it's one of, at least my favorite parts, is that we have the ability to talk to so many brilliant people. You've heard some of it already. If you've been here before, you know that some of the more prominent names in cultural apologetics have come alongside and joined us and written for us and helped out in this endeavor. And so it's really exciting to be able to do that. So again, we would love your support. Another way that you can subscribe or you can support us is by subscribing annually. It's on our website. And the really cool part about that is it's actually a discount to subscribe annually. So again, you love the journal, you want a paper book in your hand or a digital subscription. If you prefer to read on Kindle, I would recommend buying it from us directly rather than buying them one-off from Amazon. You will save money. So, we're not bleeding you dry here. We want you to get the content in your hands, and we want to make it affordable for you. So that's something really important to keep in mind as well. Now we are coming up close on our next segment. So again, if you are watching us on any of these channels, make sure you type in #TheBard, because let's be real, a giveaway is a lot more exciting when a lot of people enter it. There's not very much drama if only a few people enter the giveaway. So I'm very, but one thing that I would also like to talk about while we have a few minutes, while I'm waiting for you to put those in, is our upcoming schedule, because this is really exciting, and this issue is live on our website right now. The print versions will be going out in the near future, but an unexpected journal goes on. We have a whole year of 2023 planned out for you. And so some of the things you might be able to look forward to in the next year. in the spring, we have an issue coming out on mystery. And I don't know if Carla feels the same way. I'm not sure if her microphone's working right now, but it's when we proposed this topic, I thought we were going to receive a lot of articles on Sherlock Holmes and Agatha Christie, things of that nature. And we did, right? We received things like that, but we also received some amazing submissions about maybe the mystery of God through science, things of that nature. So people really took this theme and ran with it, and it was very, very, very exciting. So I'm really excited for that one to come out. After that, in the summer, we have King Arthur. So kind of like Shakespeare, the Arthurian tales are classics, and there have been many, many, many renditions of different Arthurian tales. And so we're excited to be able to take a look at that and be able to kind of comment and share on Arthur, the Knights of the Round Table, questions of virtue and vice and adventure and epic quests. And so our summer issue, if you followed us for a long time, is typically a little more, I don't want to say popular culture oriented, but we've done film and music, we've done Arthur. We like these story kind of issues in the summer. So after that, this is one that I personally, if you know me, and actually if you know Joe, you know that we are sports people as well. And so next fall, we've called it Play and Prayer, Sports and Leisure as Spiritual Formation. Also, one of our board members, Riz Corsini, is a huge sports fan. Unfortunately, he's a Cubs fan. Unfortunately, I'm a sad Phillies fan. Joe is a much happier Astros fan. But we're thinking that sports really, and leisure in general, it doesn't have to be just competitive team sports, are things that help us enjoy life. And the things that we enjoy for their own sake often. Sometimes you just want to go shoot a basketball for the fun of it. So I think ultimately, I'm really excited about that issue, to be honest. And I'm already plotting what I'm going to submit myself. And then last but certainly not least, our winter issue. We always, as you've noticed, if you followed the journal for a long time, we always highlight a person. We've done Tolkien. We've obviously done Shakespeare, shockingly, as you might wonder from today. We did one on Michael Ward's Planet Narnia. We did one highlighting Norfolk Holly Ordway. We did G.H. Chesterton. So this coming winter, we are embracing the spirit of winter, and we are going to Russia with Dostoevsky. So that is what's coming up in the next year. And I'm really excited. So if you subscribe, obviously, all of those will be coming to your mailbox or your inbox or both. But now that I am about out of time, because it's almost 4:11, it's about time to transition to the next segment, as you can see on the screen. One more call, and it is hashtag the Bard. So it's obviously wherever you are. If you're on Facebook, if you're on YouTube, please do that. And in about 1 minute, we will be doing that random drawing, and then we will be transitioning to our next panel. And our next panel is going to be, it's entitled Shakespearean Characterizations. Sarah will be doing the interviewing, and she will be speaking with Joe Ricky about his essay, Jack Keller about his essay, and John Cox about his essay. So you won't want to miss that in a minute, but I think we are now going to put this on the screen to do the random drawing. So let's see if I can do this right. Carla is the technological one, not me. I apologize. All right, so there it is on screen. And hopefully it will shuffle. Let's see. It should be. Let's see. Sorry about that. I know at least have one entry, which would be rather undramatic, but let me see. Well, maybe. Well, I don't know why that isn't working, but tell you what, since we're at time here, we're going to transition and we'll figure it out and we'll do a double giveaway later. Sound like a plan? So we will now transition off. Carla and I will disappear, and it will be back moment. And yeah, we will wait till the end. Yes, sir. That is the plan. All right, so we will be back on the other side.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the panel on Shakespeare and characterization, which is a very broad category, sort of deliberately, because these pieces intersect in different ways with that question, and we're going to kind of unpack a little bit about that. But first of all, I'm going to get everyone to go around and introduce themselves, if that's okay, because you know yourselves better than I do. If I say we're going in the order that you are on my screen, that's not going to be the same as it is the order on your screen necessarily. So we're going to go in alphabetical order. You'll begin with J, so that's an easy start, I guess. But we'll go with Jack, then Joe, then John, if that's okay. So just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about who you are, what your background is, and then we'll start unpacking your work then.
So you wanted me first? Am I?
If that's
We're all
okay.
Jay, Sarah. It's like...
Okay. I'm Jack Heller. I teach at Huntington University in Indiana. Been here for 21 years. I do Shakespeare. I also, a few years ago, began a program in a prison called Shakespeare at Pendleton near Indianapolis, and was able to direct, I think, 4 shows before pandemic and other things got in the way. So that no longer exists, but maybe in the future I'll be able to do something like that again. And part of what I directed, I'll just mention, is Much Ado About Nothing, just the Dogberry scenes, as it turns out. So it's been on my mind.
That's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much.
We don't really know who's next since we're all Jay.
You're up, Joe.
Okay. I'm going to sort of pass and say I've sort of been introduced already and been talking a whole lot. So, but I am Joe. I did co-edit the journal issue, and I am now an independent scholar who works mostly on Inklings and Shakespeare.
I'm John Cox. I retired from teaching 7 years ago. I taught at Westmont College, the University of Victoria, Harvard University, Calvin College, and what was then Calvin College, and Hope College, and also University of California, Berkeley at various times. I have done some publishing, and I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much, everyone. Okay, perfect. Those of you who were watching earlier will have seen me ask this question to the poets, and I'm going to ask it again because I think it's a good question. So I'd like to hear a little bit about either your first encounter with Shakespeare and your favorite play or poem by Shakespeare. They will not necessarily be the same thing, though they might be. But you can answer either prong of that question depending on your preference. And we're going to stick with the same order because that makes my life easier.
I'm not sure that's an order of what ought to be priority, but anyway, my first encounters with Shakespeare were, of course, the high school assignments, and then the undergraduate course for an English major. But really, I don't think I envisioned myself as being a Shakespearean in any kind of way until grad school, when I noticed something in Coriolanus that I'm not sure anybody else ever really noticed, at least within that class and maybe ever, just the imagery of hydras all over that play. And that experience gave me the thought that maybe I could read and find things in Shakespeare that perhaps others had not noticed. And perhaps this is even true of the essay that I have now. We'll see. But favorite plays, I'm always in favor of the lesser known ones. I'm a big fan of Timon of Athens and, Coriolanus and King John and, the plays that never get, you mention them and people say, what, who? That kind
The
of thing.
underdogs. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's perfect. Thank you very much. Yeah, and Shakespeare's such a hard, in so many ways, such a hard field to say something new about, right? It's then, I think, especially exciting when you do say something new, which I think your piece does in this issue as well. Great, let's keep going.
What was the question, Sarah?
So first encounter with Shakespeare or favorite play or both?
Yeah. So the first was I put it in my I think in my introductory essay in the journal was sophomore English, The Merchant of Venice, with the inimitable Father Grimes, Oblates of Mary Immaculate, who sat in a wheelchair, had his bulldog in the class, and chain smoked as he taught Merchant of Venice. And we listened to it on a tape, but he gave us the allegorical reading. And that was, in that same year, some other priests gave me tickets to go see a performance of Comedy of Errors, which was wild and masked and just a carnival. And it was so great. And so those are my first experiences. And I've always loved coming at interpretation of Shakespeare via performance, or at least keeping an eye on performance and thinking about that. And I think that first performance did something probably to trigger that in me. And my favorite play is As You Like It.
I'll address the favorite play question. My favorite play is The Winter's Tale. I was very pleased to discover that in the Yale University Library, Beinecke Library, is the copy of Shakespeare owned by, can't think of his name right now, but anyway, at the end of The Winter's Tale, he wrote in his copy of his collection of plays, "A world here." And that's my response to The Winter's Tale as well. It seems to me to be remarkably wide-ranging and widely appealing.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
There's a lot about Winter's Tale in different ways, in different sections of our journal issue.
Good.
Yeah.
Grace Tiffany's essay certainly touches upon it, and as does Jennifer's poem and other places. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, that leads me nicely then into thinking about what it was that you all wrote about. So this is a hard thing to do, I know, because I've got to do it later. But I'm going to get you to try and give a kind of brief précis of your piece, and then an excerpt that you want to share with us. That might just be a kind of summary, or it might be a paragraph that you've picked out that you think, this is something really interesting that my piece is doing, basically so that people can say, oh, great, I'm going to go and read that now. We're going to stick with the same order, if that's okay. So just a kind of an overview of your piece, and then a brief excerpt that you'd like to share.
Well, what I was looking at, what I am looking at, is the character of Dogberry in the play Much Ado About Nothing. And it comes from realizing at one time that even though a lot of what he says is kind of not very directly stated, it still had a kind of meaning. At least it seemed like it might have a kind of meaning, particularly a line in the play, "O villain, thou shalt be condemned into everlasting redemption for this." And I thought that actually can mean something. And I picked a paragraph. I'm hoping that it's short enough. I don't know, but I'll cut me off if you need to. Okay, but
Go for it.
Dogberry, Verges, and the Watchmen, fools though they may be, are effective instruments of divine grace. Attention to the language of Dogberry and his associates will show that their malapropisms, those are these misused words or seemingly misused words, open up expansive possibilities for grace when seemingly more apt words are also more limiting of meaning. I'll spare the rest of the paragraph, but largely I'm just interested in do his words really open up possibilities for kind of a portraying redemption of some of the other characters. And I suggest that the play shows as such. So that's the argument I've put in the work that I've done.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote an introduction, which is an introduction to Shakespeare and cultural apologetics, which I hope everybody reads, in which I talk about things like the hermeneutics of suspicion and other things. But I'm also wrote a piece. It's a sermon. I did that so I wouldn't have to put in any footnotes. And it's actually was delivered previously as a sermon. It really is. And I'm going to just read a little bit of it. It's about a character named Jaques. I pronounce his name Jakes, which is the name I grew up using for the latrine or the place where the toilet was. And I think that Shakespeare may have had that in mind. That it was certainly in use already at that time. In the play As You Like It, who's a melancholy cynic. And he gives a speech, all the world's a stage, which is the verse of my sermon. Despite his expression in pretty verse, Jake's vision is finally, like much pessimism, rather unimaginative. Like Sartre, he seems to imagine hell as other people. I imagine hell as being with a person who imagines hell as other people. Of course, hell might, and I think will, include other people, as will purgatory and heaven, and eventually whatever planet Elon Musk decides to colonize in the years to come. In truth, Jake's negative countercultural ideas are really quite traditional. They are, in their own way, proverbial wise saws in modern instances, such as those he criticizes when talking about the justice. Rosalind points out that Jakes has traveled all over the world, but sees no difference between people and places, only the same imperfections everywhere. The play itself, on the other hand, specifically contrasts the court and the country, the aristocratic world and the pastoral, the cold of the wind and the worst cold of benefits forgot at court. Most of us could at least do some basic comparison contrasts after a trip to from Rhode Island to Alabama, but Jake sees only the sundry contemplations of my travels, in which my often rumination wraps me in a most humorous sadness. In other words, no matter what he actually sees, if he looks, his imagination chews it up and spits it forth as part of the pleasurable mist of pessimism in which he walks.
I'll go for the summary rather than the paragraph. My essay is called Paradoxia Shakespeareana, and it deals with paradoxes about the plays rather than in the plays. And it has three parts, three paradoxes, if you will. The plays are both Christian and secular. They are both English and universal, and they are both time-bound and timeless.
Thank you very much. Okay, great. So, a question that all of your pieces engage with in different but connected ways, I think, is about how Shakespeare is grappling with religion in his writings. And I've deliberately said in the question that you can define religion how you like, because I don't want to be prescriptive. And actually, that was one of the things that we wanted to do in the journal. We didn't want to be prescriptive about that. There's more about that in the introduction as well. But how do you each see Shakespeare grappling with religion? I'm going to be non-prescriptive about the order from here on out, so chaos might happen, but that's okay. So you could stick to the religious order if you like. You don't have to. So how do you see your piece exploring how Shakespeare grapples with religion? And you can define religion however you like.
I'll go first if you don't mind, since I've been going last. Shakespeare clearly recognizes three religions, most importantly as Christianity, which defined his culture. But he's also very aware of Judaism, as is evident in Merchant of Venice, obviously, but elsewhere. And he's aware of Islam. And that's not surprising, because the Turks, who were Islamic, were a very serious political and military threat to Europe at this point. So it seems to me that those are the principal issues when it comes to religion. Of the three, Islam makes the smallest appearance. I think it's probably true to say that Othello was originally Islamic, given his origin in North Africa. But aside from some references to the Turks, it doesn't appear much of anywhere else. And Christianity, of course, is pervasive. I'll stop there.
You or me, Joe? Okay. I'll make a comparison. My dissertation was on a contemporary of Shakespeare's, Thomas Middleton. And Middleton was very, well, how shall I put this? He wrote about his Christian beliefs in various non-dramatic texts, and you know, in a very direct way. We don't ever see Shakespeare doing that. And therefore, to work anything out in the Shakespearean text is to work out the way that he embodies, you know, through character, through plot, through language. I don't think Shakespeare is going, you know, I did not read Joe's sermon yet, but I don't think Shakespeare is preaching to us. You know, I think he's forming religious characters. He's forming religious experiences for his characters. That tends to be how I see it. However, before I let go of the mic to a degree, I'm also going to observe that Shakespeare uses variants of the word grace probably 1,000 times. And I can show where I'm getting that from. You can look up an online concordance. So I don't think that his religious portrayals are negligible. I think they have to be accounted for, even if they are not as directly stated as Middleton does in his prose works. So that's the last point I'll make. Joe?
Super good stuff there. And, you know, I think in my introduction, I write about it in terms of it's complicated. And I even say, you know, there may be a Jewish cultural apologetic that we can take away from Shakespeare, at least a little bit, in Merchant of Venice. Shylock is an apologist, and he's given the stage. And but But in terms of the sermon, I think Shakespeare constructs a sermon and doesn't preach it. What I mean by that is, of course, there is the medieval drama, which I think exerts pressure on Shakespeare, and I think I've shown that in a lot of my life and career has been looking at the connections between Shakespeare and the medieval drama. But so in the character Jaques, for example, it has a voice in a big dialogue. I mean, these plays are dialogical. They're so wonderfully diverse point of views in a Shakespeare play. Are they weighted? There's not one Shakespeare saying this about any one character, but I do think there's a certain weight pressing against. We need Jaques or Jakes in As You Like It. We need him to balance the sweetness of all that comedy, etc. But Rosalind also is already pretty skeptical about things, including men and romance and all that sort of thing. There's all these different varieties of what could be cynicism, pessimism, or just resistance to easy answers. And so that's the way. I also just think Shakespeare it's so diverse, right? It's not like he attacks monks, but he may have a bad monk. It's not like he attacks Puritans, but he may have a bad Puritan. It's not that he attacks nuns, but or any of these things, these religious figures, and it's God's plenty for me in terms of Shakespeare and religion. If we don't try to pin it down and say this was Shakespeare's absolute religious belief about everything, and we just look at his presentation of it, and then we can maybe make our best judgments about it. But yeah, I didn't answer your question. I'm sorry, Sarah.
No, that was helpful. I think. I think part of what each of the pieces is showing is that one of the things that Shakespeare does is when he's putting something on stage, that doesn't necessarily mean he is upholding it or condoning it. He might be doing both, and he might actually be problematizing something as well. And it's all too easy to say, well, this equals that, and much more interesting to say, well, what is this doing and why? And why should we care about it? What does that mean for us right now? And what did it mean then as well? And I think in different ways, your pieces are all kind of skirting around that, which is great. And leads me very nicely into my next question. So this is more thinking about, we've talked a bit about religion in the, however you want to define it, kind of term. Now let's have a think about cultural apologetics. So this question is more thinking about how your piece engages with, explores, does cultural apologetics, delete as appropriate. And if you would like to, you could also talk a little bit about how you've explored this in other work as well. That might be in terms of performance, it might be in terms of projects you've been involved with, or in teaching, or any which way you want to take that. But primarily thinking about how your piece is engaging with cultural apologetics, or doing it, or etc. Take it how you like. Again, go in whichever order you like.
Your turn to be first, Joe.
Well, I'll just say, I mentioned somewhere, I forget where, that my piece, it's in my introduction, my sermon is something like or close to what I call primary cultural apologetics. It's really using this stuff. And I think most of the works in the volume and many of the things I've ever read about cultural apologetics are about cultural apologetics, their descriptions of it, interpretations, that sort of thing. And I think a lot of the pieces, like yours, Jack, and like Gary's and on Lear, they do that well, and then they do point. They do have a kind of apologetic movement, cultural apologetic movement, to say we're still pointing at something here beyond just describing it. But anyway, so yeah. So as you know, I engaged in it to a degree in what I call primary cultural apologetics. Although I said by the fact that it's in this volume and that I'm talking about it undercuts that a little bit and makes it a mongrel. Yeah.
Go ahead, Jack.
Well, I think I'll point to some to my prison work here for a moment, because I mentioned it in a footnote. I should be ashamed of myself for saying this, but my favorite Dogberry ever is the one I directed. And we were forbidden by the prison to do anything that suggested police or law enforcement or anything. So I, looking at the language, suggested to my actor that he play Dogberry as a preacher or as a he was an African American man. He had a church background, so as a Baptist deacon or a Baptist preacher. And I must say, one of the great moments of that short performance was his laying the Holy Ghost on Leontes. Leonardo, excuse me, I'm missing my mixing up my characters. Leonardo. I'm not even sure Leonardo saw that one coming. But there was a laying on of hands during that moment. It's just, and it really worked very well. I wasn't trying to use the play to in any way sort of preach to the men performing or the audience or anything like that. It was just a fun opportunity that I think became a little bit more than we all expected in the time frame that we had. So there we go.
Thanks, Jack. I want to start by saying that I apologize to all Americanists for forgetting Herman Melville's name, but it was Herman Melville's copy of Shakespeare in the Beinecke Library that I was referring to earlier. In any case, the phrase cultural apologetics is not in my vocabulary, so I would appreciate a little more direction as to what you're asking for, what you're asking about.
Well, so one of the things when we were writing the call for submissions, one of the things we did was think about, okay, well, how are we going to define what cultural apologetics is for this issue? And Joe talks about
was in the call.
It was in the call, and Joe quotes the call in the intro.
Well, it's obviously a phrase I didn't pay much attention to because I don't recognize it.
Yeah.
But in any case,
it's looking at cultural texts, but more than cultural texts, cultural phenomena, experiences. We've been talking about it a little earlier here today before you came on, and this journal deals with it all the time. That's what they do. And this was a special issue on Shakespeare. And it's like how we might look at science fiction or certain kind of well, I don't think they've had one on dance yet, but but other kinds of art forms or other cultural expressions. And what do these? How can we interpret them in a sort of an apologetic way? Use them. You will enjoy, I think, Sarah's essay on King Lear and the way C.S. Lewis uses it in his definition of affection in The Four Loves. And although she stretches about 3 lines in Lewis's thing to 30 pages of an article, but hey, I mean, no judgment here. All right, but it's using these cultural works and cultural experiences in a sort of apologetic way. And when I say primary, secondary, when you're doing it, there are works that's the heart and soul of them. It's what's there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Others perhaps are not, but we come alongside them and interpret them the way Lewis would have, the way the medievals or the early Christians interpreted classical myths. They use them as allegories of Christianity. Sorry.
Right. Thanks, Joe. I guess in terms of, it's sort of related to cultural assumptions, I guess. And one of this may not speak to the point, but one of the obvious cultural assumptions that Shakespeare makes is to be anti-Jewish. So that we don't like Shylock as the villain of his play, despite the fact that he's given extraordinarily sympathetic lines. And if you compare him with Marlowe's Barabbas, he's amazing. He's simply an amazing creation. But the point is, the anti-Judaism in Shakespeare's culture was profound, and he obviously buys into it. in a remarkable way. So that perhaps addresses something about cultural apologetics.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. And actually, in the issue, there's a nice page, which I don't know how well it.
It's right before John's paper.
So there's a page which has Portia's speech on mercy and Shylock's speech side by side.
Juxtaposed.
And, yeah. And it works really well, I think, to help people think about, okay, well, actually, how are we defining this and how are we perceiving these ideas? Which your piece also draws out really nicely as well. So hopefully, and the quotations are deliberately placed all the way through the issue.
Good. I'll look for that.
We have Erasmus right before yours, Jack, on Wise Folly, or Christian Fools.
Yeah, when you first contacted me about this, I had not. I mean, I read your call, but you contacted me before I read the call, and to be sort of to lay my cards on the table, I don't think Shakespeare has any consciousness of the idea of cultural apologetics.
No,
I think
I agree. Absolutely,
right?
not an issue.
Yeah,
something we lay on him, right?
Yeah, I mean that's a context that we have in our moment here that he's participating in. But on the other hand, the idea that he would draw from sermons or religious currents in his time, I think that has been demonstrated in a whole lot of research.
Of course.
James Shapiro, whom I know that you've mentioned in your article, John, and I've liked his work. He showed some things related to Julius Caesar and a sermon by Lancelot Andrews in his 1599 book. Yep. And I'm thinking I'm doing that to some degree successfully with the material on Richard Hooker. I think there are a lot of cultural moments in his own time that he certainly brings into his work, and that could be looked at as examples or something along these lines.
No, it could be emblematic of spiritual truth. And Shakespeare's not a preacher, but there might very well be. I mean, if we believe in theme at all, we don't have to, but if we believe in theme, such a thing as that, which I believe Shakespeare was first and foremost believed in getting a good play up on the boards and making some money. But besides that, he had these other beliefs. And John, to John's point earlier, in John's essay, it's a Christian nation, not that they're all agreed about everything. Oh. You might have an apologist from an opinion saying, we shouldn't be Puritans like that. We should be more like this or something. And that might be the apology. Yeah.
Well, I have to apologize for the fact that I have to go. I thank you very much for inviting me, and it's been an enjoyable conversation, but I have a deadline, so I have to meet it. Thanks to everybody. Bye-bye.
Great to see you, John.
Thank you all so much. And I think we have to transition now to the next session, I think.
Yeah, well, you and I are switching places.
Okay. But thank you all ever so much for sharing more about your pieces and for engaging in the dialogue and for submitting them in the first place.
Dr. Heller, great to see you.
All right. Take care. I don't know how to exit, so just
keep we'll do it for you. It's like a roller coaster thing. It's beautiful. Sarah left.
Sorry, I had to poke a log on the fire.
Hi, Joe. Hi, Sarah.
Okay, you still don't have heat, right?
Correct.
Yeah, you have heat. You just have a fire that puts out about a foot of heat. Okay. Great to see you. Hello, everybody. If new folks are just joining, or coming alongside. We appreciate it. I'm Joe, and I'm one of the co-editors of this edition, this volume of An Unexpected Journal on Shakespeare and Cultural Apologetics. And two of the folks who wrote about King Lear in the journal are with us, and we're going to ask some questions and talk about that. I don't know how many here. I'm just guessing that Gary Tandy has read King Lear since he wrote an essay on it, but I don't know how many other people are focused on having seen King Lear or read it. But it's often thought to be either Shakespeare's greatest play or one of his two or three greatest plays, and a lot of people think it's one of the greatest work in dramatic history, that sort of thing. So obviously, it has a lot of gravity, a lot of weight. And just a brief note before we get into the questions, I saw the production, which I thought of as monumental, this summer at Shakespeare's Globe with Catherine Hunter, who played the three witches in the new Macbeth, of the Coen brothers Macbeth, but Catherine Hunter as Lear, and Michelle Terry, the artistic director of the Globe, as the Fool and Cordelia. And it was brilliant. There were things I have to complain about because that's what I do, but it was such a monumental experience to see a great performance that took Lear seriously and went for everything they could. And I want to thank Carla, who put the graphics in for some of the Lear scenes, for not putting in the Ian McKellen scene, the famous Ian McKellen storm scene, where on the stage of the RSC he stripped down to Ian. And, where it says he takes off his clothes, he really did. So we didn't get that picture to be with us here. Anyway, Gary, why don't you introduce yourself?
Okay. Can you all hear me okay?
We can hear you great.
Great. So my name is Gary Tandy. I teach at George Fox University in Oregon, near Portland. I teach Shakespeare and British literature and as much C.S. Lewis as I can get into my classes. And I've taught Shakespeare for probably 25 years, but have never really written on Shakespeare until this time. And so I was really happy to be able to write this essay and excited about the issue.
This might be helpful for like anyone who wants to write, like for An Unexpected Journal or anything else. Like, how did that come about, Gary? Because it's an interesting process.
Yeah. I was thinking when you were talking about cultural apologetics in the previous panel, that when you guys, you and Sarah first contacted me, I think, about this issue, and I had never heard of An Unexpected Journal. And I didn't know that it was a Christian journal at first. And so when I was first working on my proposal, I was trying to figure out how to put it in terms that would not scare non-Christians away. And then I happened to
It's actually a good exercise.
Yeah. And it was kind of, scholarship 101. I failed there because I should have looked first at the journal. When I did look at the journal and found out it came from Houston Baptist and was obviously had a Christian orientation, then my whole view changed. Anyway, so back to the essay. It started out as a blog post, actually, that I wrote probably 5 years ago for my personal blog. And so I sent that to Joe and Sarah and just said, is this kind of what you're talking about? You think this would have any possibilities? And as I remember, you wrote back and said, yeah, it looks interesting, but have you ever thought about, expanding this into like a 15 or 20 page paper? And I said, no, I've never, and I really wasn't planning on spending my summer doing that.
Sorry, we apologize. Yeah.
But no, you shouldn't, because it actually turned out to be a great exercise. And I love the process. I loved writing about Lear, which is one of my favorite plays. And it was fun to kind of take this this little idea that I had kind of come up with about how King Lear talks about homelessness, and then develop it into a kind of a full-blown essay. So that's kind of how it all came about. Yeah.
We were both we were both so happy that when we saw it and said, oh, this needs to be like a longer thing, and and Sarah, maybe somebody's just coming right now, so maybe you should introduce yourself, or maybe since you've just been a host, you haven't been introduced. So you want to go ahead?
Sure. Yeah. I'm Sarah. I am based in the UK. I work at a university which no one's ever heard of, called the University of Buckingham. Okay, some people have heard of. I don't work at Buckingham Palace. That would be really cool, but I don't. People always think I do. And I never get to teach Shakespeare. But that is what my background is in my PhD, was in Shakespeare and drama. So I was super excited to be involved in editing this journal, and writing the piece as well was good fun, because my actual area of specialism is, I guess, C.S. Lewis and Shakespeare, and both of them independently and together. The together part is kind of what this piece explores.
Yeah. So a great outlet for that, because I know that you've done a lot on Lewis's reading of Shakespeare, his interpretations of Shakespeare, his annotations in Shakespearean texts that he owned. And yeah, so that's great. Now, I gave you guys some sample questions. One was, why is King Lear important? Who cares? Now, the answer might be, well, he's important because he supplied me the material for a good essay that I got done. But that's not exactly what I mean. Like, why Lear, right? Because, like, we have to deal with just, like, why Shakespeare? That's like a preliminary question anytime today. Mm-hmm. And then we go beyond that and say, oh, yeah, and this one's rather complicated and really sad. And a guy gets his eyes gouged out in Act 3. And, all this. Why King Lear? Why is it important? And we don't have to say everyone must read it. But, why is this something that you both galvanized you both enough to write about it? Gary?
Oh, lots of reasons. I would say, as I approach a certain age, Lear has probably become more important for me, and it is one of the only Shakespeare plays, if you think about it, that focuses on a senior citizen, and and also the parental-child relationships in the play have always fascinated me, and both the pain, of those relationships can sometimes bring, but also the possibility of healing and true love that can come about. So it's always been a play that has just intrigued me and often confused me, and it's not the easiest play to make sense of, but it's become more meaningful to me, I think, over the years as I've read and taught it.
I love that true love. And you were talking about parent-child there. It's not a word we use. That's not an expression we tend to use, right? And that's an amazing answer. I just want to shout out to John Cox, who was just with us in his depiction of how Shakespeare is a writer for all time, not just for his own time. He does a nice job. Those of you who've read that, and if you haven't, give it a look, about parent-child stuff. That he's focused on this. I mean, he cares about it, and we see it on both sides. Like, in a very redemptive way, we would say that's me being all cultural apologetic again, in a very redemptive way, or in other ways, we might say sinful ways. But it's lovely, and yet it's such a dark play in many ways, but not completely. Although I've had people disagree with me about that. Sarah, what about you? Why King Lear?
Well, a couple of reasons, I guess. I think, it was the first play that I had to do a kind of close reading exercise with when I was an undergrad, and for whatever reason, that just was how it fell. We had to write about, I forget what it was, blindness and seeing, I think, which is major in Lear in all kinds of different ways. And I guess connects, interestingly, with cultural apologetics as well. But anyway, but also I think it's perhaps the Shakespeare play, aside from maybe Love's Labour's Lost, where the ending totally guts me, like totally. And I think this is something that Gary's piece really nicely draws out. as well. Like, the first time I read Gary's piece, it had the same effect that King Lear has on me, in terms of like the kind of feeling response. And I think part of that is thinking about, okay, what is Shakespeare doing here? And why does he make us feel these things? And why does that hit so hard? So yeah, I guess that's why.
You're muted, Joe.
Thank you for saying that, Gary. This is so much like always. It's a hall of horrors in a way. You know, it's just this tragedy, which leads me to my next question about why isn't tragedy pessimistic and why should Christians deal with it? But it's also this deeply emotional. And you think, Sarah, that it's designed to kind of evoke this kind of emotion on the part of the audience, and of course that's part of your critical approach and that sort of thing through affective or feeling criticism, as it so to speak. But yeah, it's amazing. So what about this? Tragedy is pessimistic. Why shouldn't Christian? This reminds me of arguments about the minor key that I used to hear in church. Right? Don't use the minor key. We're Christians. We have the victory. What about tragedy and what about pessimism? You know, there is no eucatastrophe of Tolkienian proportions to save us at the end of Lear.
Yeah.
What is there? I mean, so how do you answer that? And just so the audience knows, you're not totally unprepared, I hope. I mean, I did let you guys know I was going to ask this question.
I'll try it. So Sarah's comment about the ending of Lear and the way it guts her made me think of Samuel Johnson's comment about the play when he said that he read the end of Lear once and he could never bring himself to read it again. But of course, also Johnson was coming from that very, very moralistic, kind of approach to literature. And he was upset that the good person dies, and without any cause. And there's something to be said for that. I also think tragedy sheds kind of a realistic light on life, because who has not suffered, who will not undergo suffering in pain and conflict in their relationships. And certainly we could say that tragedy maybe magnifies those a little bit or a lot, but in some ways, Lear's suffering, Lear's conflict with his children is not fundamentally different than the conflicts that many parents undergo with children. And there's always that constant need of, or this constant movement with children of maybe disaffection and then coming back into relationship. And so I would just say, I would almost prefer to call it realism as opposed to tragedy, I guess.
Although
and how do you deal with that?
Pretty sure it's tragic though. But go ahead, Sarah.
Well, I suppose there was a rewrite of King Lear in the Restoration period by a guy called Adam Tate, who most people know for writing While Shepherds Watched, the Christmas.
Yeah, he was a great writer.
But he also rewrote King Lear to give it a happy ending.
Yep.
So in Tate's version, Cordelia lives, but I don't think it ultimately gives a happy ending, and I think it takes a lot away from the play. But I think also part of that is because, yes, it's that particularly Cordelia's death is so tragic, but it also prompts the question: what kind of a world would she have lived in had she have lived, right? Mm-hmm. And Shakespeare is getting us to think about those kind of things, I think, and is positing the possibility of resurrection, but maybe that resurrection isn't here. And so I think in that kind of pointing that tragedy particularly offers, that's why it isn't necessarily pessimistic. It might be. But also that we need that pessimism too, right?
I mean, I think the Greeks, I mean, they didn't think tragedy was pessimistic, but they knew it was pretty sad. But it's like it has this whole function, which we don't have time to get into what they thought about it, at least what Aristotle did. But I would encourage everyone to read Jennifer Woodruff Tate's poem that looks at the ending of Lear and the ending of Winter's Tale. She talked about it earlier today at the beginning, one of our early sessions. But you can see now where that's really coming from is like Leontes and Lear are both really bad, both have some very grave moral failures. And they both get punished for it, cultural apologetics, if you want, or just standard life. They both pay heavy consequences. Leontes gets his beloved back, and Lear does not. But there's also this idea that Lear has a kind of redemption, maybe, at least Gary thinks he does, I think. But it doesn't mean everything gets solved in this present life. Yeah. You're going to have this redemption. It doesn't mean everything you've done. There's still consequences. Sorry to say.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Gary.
I was just going to add on to that. I think Lear, the most striking thing to me was looking again at the ending was the way that Lear, I think, comes to recognize that he is loved by Cordelia. And, as Sarah's essay talks about, the need love can be just a horrible thing, as Lewis says. And so Lear starts the play on that need love spectrum where he wants to be flattered. He wants to be loved in this false way. But he ends the play with Cordelia forgiving him. And I think that's what allows him to achieve that redemption. And maybe not the redemption, but for him, I think that's a key moment in the play where he confesses to Cordelia and she forgives him.
Yeah. It's only ironic, I suppose, to point out that she says he says when she's forgiven him, no need. Or is that him?
She says
that no need. Yeah. When he's asking for forgiveness.
Yeah.
Well, we don't have much more time. And Sarah and Gary, let's quickly summarize what you do in your essays because they're both really wonderful and I want people to read them. So Gary, essentially you've mentioned it, but tell us the crux of your argument.
Well, I think the argument could be summarized as saying that in the play, kind of the way I'm reading it at least, is that Lear goes on a kind of journey or a quest. And that quest involves learning how to love and learning how to let others love him. And he starts with a very at a very bad place, of course, at the beginning of the play. He doesn't seem to have any kind of sense of anybody except himself. So he's very selfish. One of the references I make in the essay, which might be people that love Lewis might want to hear, is that I'll just quote this. We could say of Lear, in the storm scene, we can say of Lear what the narrator of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe says of Edmund when he sees the squirrel family who has been turned into stone by the White Witch. For the first time, the narrator says, Edmund felt sorry for someone besides himself.
Yeah.
And so I see Lear's journey as one from selfishness to selflessness, in a sense. And the other key factor in my essay, I guess, that maybe is a little bit unique, is the idea that it's on the heath that Lear discovers his connection with the homeless people, or the people who are houseless, as he calls them, which is quite an interesting usage by Shakespeare. And he begins to identify with those houseless people who cannot protect themselves from the pitiless storm. And I interpret that in especially his speech that struck me was his Poor Naked Wretches speech, where it's essentially a prayer where he is concerned about these people who are out here and who are helpless. And so I think it's that point in the play where he begins to turn from this totally selfish ruler who's been pampered and who's been privileged. And for the first time in his life, he recognizes that there are people out here who he could have been helping all along, but now he finally comes to that recognition. And to me, that was a key turning point in the play.
And you, I think, compared it a little bit to the parable of the sheep and goats, where as you've done it to the least of these, you've done it unto me.
Yeah,
and that kind of Christian moral. It's a moral kind of in every culture and every religion, but Jesus' parable gives it that moral energy. You know, he says like, look, you know, you're going that way if you haven't done it to me, which means doing it to him or her. And you know, so that provides a little energy to it. Now, what about yours, Sarah? Because yours is totally, or at least takes its focus on Lewis and his use of Lear in the Four Loves. So give us, we do have at least 40 seconds for you to do, no, 4 minutes or 5 to do that.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, that's essentially the crux of it. I look at how Lewis uses King Lear in the Four Loves. So in his section where he's talking about affection, the first love that he tackles, and why he uses Lear, and what his use of Lear can suggest about Shakespeare's possibility in terms of cultural apologetics, but why Lewis is using him, but also potentially what kind of a reading that suggests that actually is quite in alignment with the kind of readings of Shakespeare today, by which I mean readings that focus on how a play engages an audience engages the feelings of an audience in some fashion, or the reader, I guess, if you're reading the play, and of course Lewis was reading the play. But why that's worth paying attention to. And so basically I'm suggesting, first of all, that Lewis was ahead of the curve in terms of that kind of way of reading Shakespeare. Not the first person to do it, but he was an early practitioner of that approach. And that we should pay attention to when Lewis uses Shakespeare in this way. And finally, that way of reading Shakespeare can actually open up a possibility for apologetics that we're maybe not engaging with so well. The kind of approach actually that Gary's piece takes.
A more emotionally laden approach, perhaps, to both Shakespeare and to apologetics. So this is actually called affect theory, or affect, AFFECT. And Sarah defines this. It's basically as clear as cultural apologetics. That's what I would say, or unclear, because I kept saying, "No, what is affect theory again?" But it's a very powerful approach that is, and we don't connect it with people of Lewis's time, you know, in terms of this approach. But he's doing it in the Four Loves because he has to write about affection. But he's saying, "Well, this is how I can talk about this. Look at Lear and his relationship with his daughters." So, but also Sarah has some very suggestive stuff about how this relates to cultural apologetics, or how it can relate, or perhaps relate, as we look at this using literature in this way. You set it up. I think we have a minute. Sarah, you set it up at the beginning about what Lewis says both here and in his letters to Welsh, for whom he did the BBC talks, about why he uses literature the way he does in his apologetics. And you want to give us that rather than have me try to remember what you said?
Yeah, I don't
read it. I mean, I know you know it. So
no, I don't. Not off the top of my head. I can pull it up right now, but yeah, so the gist of it is that he was thinking about, okay, what are people familiar with? What is their frame of reference? And we wouldn't maybe necessarily automatically think Shakespeare today, although maybe we would. And this is something that other scholars have engaged with as well. But Lewis thinks, well, okay, well, maybe people are more familiar with Lear, or maybe Lear would be a better fit here. And so he says, here we go, I have found it. In his letter to James Welsh of the BBC, he says, although the New Testament always assumes an audience who already believe in the law of nature and know they have disobeyed it, in modern England, the situation is quite different. We cannot assume this, and therefore most apologetic begins a stage too far on. So this kind of suggests, well, why Shakespeare? Well, what do people know?
This can also be, this is also like a raison d'etre for an unexpected journal or things like that. Most things begin too far on and people aren't there and can't connect. And I'm sure that Holly, Michael, Lou, and all the people involved with An Unexpected Journal have all thought about this in their classes. This passage from Lewis, but if not, look it up. It's in his letter to Welsh about his talks on the radio. And he's just saying, no, we can't assume that. So we have to have a new common ground. My question, of course, as we continue to explore what we might mean by cultural apologetics, is then how we find the common ground that actually works. And just because something is relevant, does that make it best? I would say that he's not using Shakespeare just because he's relevant. The newspapers were relevant. And he hated newspapers and he didn't use them except as a negative example. Yeah. So there's never a simple answer to any of this sort of stuff. But at least we can see this kind of thinking. He's like, that's why I can't. And we always say, well, why didn't you use the Bible more in Mere Christianity? Well, there you go. He had it on his mind, but it's not the thing. So anyway. Great to be with you guys. Lear is a monster. I think we can agree. I don't mean King Lear is a monster at the beginning of the play, which he is, but I mean King Lear the play is a monster, and so full of insight and life and things to talk about and argue about, things that matter, as someone said in a previous panel. I forget which one it was. So. What's up next, guys? Somebody tell me what the schedule is, because I've been going so long, I kind of have forgotten.
Here, I'll jump in and join for fun. We're going to transition to a conclusion, and then that will be the end of our lunch party. So, thank you all.
Okay. Bye, Sarah. Bye, Gary. Thank you, Zach. Thank you, Carla. I'll just be watching from the sides here. Okay.
All right. Thanks, everyone. All right. Let's see, Carla, is your audio back? Let's try this.
Oh, let me
Wait.
see.
Yes.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, awesome. Okay, here's the thing. Thank you so much, Joe and Sarah. Gary, that was amazing. So I was just thinking, I was watching this whole live stream experience has been a little bit like this issue, because this is the first time we've had guest editors. I don't know what this experience was like for Joe and Sarah. I'm sure they will be willing to give us feedback about this, because we're just kind of figuring it out as we go. And we're streaming on StreamYard, and they've made a lot of changes just in the past couple months. And one of those I discovered was that if you share a tab using Firefox, then your mic's muted. So there's a lot of little things I think that need to straighten out. But that was just so amazing. One of the things I wanted to mention is that, like we said, this started out of okay, it's hard to explain. This isn't like an official university publication. We are our own 501c3, but everybody that started it was out of that program. And so we have alumni that participate. Louis Marcos is, funny. He wrote the book on apologetics and what was the 20th century? But he
Yeah.
doesn't teach any of our classes at all. We read the book, but he doesn't teach our classes. But anyway, I did want to share a couple of exciting things. Two of our board members, Riz Cressini and Jasmine Biggs, actually graduated yesterday. So I've been so busy, I haven't even been able to have time to look for pictures. There was a get together at the Hobbit Cafe in Houston today for a celebration. So I'm hoping to see pictures of that. So we want to say congratulations to Jasmine and Riz, and they are actually going to be issue editors for the Play and Prayer issue in September. The other thing is that we just found out today was that Malcolm Geit, who was a contributor in our issue honoring the work of Michael Ward, Planet Narnia, his poem Refugee is going to be read at the Christmas service. It's like the Royal Christmas service in England. Like King Charles chose that to be read, which I think is amazing, and I think it's really appropriate. And Gary, I'm going to have to go back and read your piece and read Malcolm's piece, his poem, because that's really what Christmas is, right? It's Jesus came to the least of these, and there was no room for him. People. We think of it like an inn, like we go to a hotel, but it was his family home, and they didn't have a place for a pregnant woman because they had some ideas about who she was and what she had done. And so he's born in this, some people think it's a cave, some think it's a stable, but he had to go out and he wasn't welcomed in. And so I just think that's kind of thing to remember. Like, remember at Christmas time that Jesus was not accepted pretty much all throughout his life from birth. So anyway, it's a couple of things that I wanted to mention as exciting things. The other thing too, since I was muted in the intermission, I wanted to mention this. So we have a couple bookstores that stock the journal. Zach talked about them. 8th Day Books was our first one. They have a website that if they have issues in stock, they can order them, or you can order them online from them, and they will also have them in their in the store. But either of them, if you just want to support your local bookstore, you can go in and just ask them to order them for you, so you can pick them up in person. The other bookstore that we're in is the Nest in Kingwood, Texas, where I live, and they did have 6 issues of Joy to begin with, and when I talked to the owner the other day, they only had 1, but she said they would stop by and you can order one there anytime. If you're in the Houston area, you should go by and visit. They're just this little store, but you can go in and they'll give you coffee and a cookie, and you need prayer for something, they'll just pray for you right there. They've given Melissa, one of the co-owners, gave a word of encouragement for our contributors, and I go in all the time and they pray for different stuff. So anyway, that's a place to stop by if you're in the area. So Zach, what should we talk about next? I'm sorry. There's been so much going on in trying to fix some things. If you are watching and you have not entered into the giveaway, then be sure to enter #TheBard in the chat. And we are going to have a grand prize giveaway for an entire year subscription to the journal, which is amazing. Absolutely amazing. I think Zach's muted.
Yeah, sorry about that. But yes, and one really, it's so interesting that you brought up Malcolm Geit, because one of our contributors for the Shakespeare issue, who was unable to join us today, Jem Bloomfield, actually wrote about N.T. Wright and Malcolm Geit. So
really? Okay.
it's a beautiful, and that one has some incredibly cool artwork with it. One of our friends who often works under a pseudonym made some AI generated art. So it's incredibly cool. And obviously the essay is brilliant too. So Jem, if you're listening, I love that too. The artwork complements it perfectly. But yes, so yeah, Carol, that was great timing. I'd forgotten that news. I'm glad you brought it up because yeah, Malcolm Ray is mentioned in this issue too. Um, and yeah, I also just as we come to a conclusion here, I do want to thank Sarah and Joe for what they did, and obviously Carla for putting today together. I mean, it's a major, massive production. Another one of our friends, Ryan, did a ton of work, and you'll see him listed in the journal. In the credits, he did a ton of work with the layout. So, Ryan Groove, shout out to you. You did amazing work. And put in a lot of
And
time.
can we just say congratulations on your new baby, Ryan? Even though you have not publicly, it's like, okay, it's like a secret thing. Your birth announcements are a thing. So happy belated congratulations, Ryan. I don't even know what the baby's name is. I'm a little upset about that actually.
My memory is terrible, so I don't remember. He told me.
He told you?
Is it? Well, yeah, I applied pressure, but no, but seriously,
Oh my gosh.
yeah, seriously, thank you everyone. It's been great, and if you've been with us all day today, or in parts of today, we obviously appreciate your support. We appreciate what you're doing for the journal. I mean, 5 years is a long time. Some of you have been here from the beginning, and we have fun doing it for all of you and with all of you. So I think, Carla, I know we're a few minutes early, but we have 2 drawings to do because of the
that's right. That's right.
the first one. So
Yeah.
I think what we're going to do, and Carla, correct me if I'm wrong, the first drawing will just be for the one, like for one copy of this issue, like we meant to do before. And then the second drawing is going to be for the year subscription. So so we all are on the same page here. If you run the first one, you get 1 issue. If you're in the second one, you get the whole year subscription. Sound good?
Yeah. So you're clicking, right? So
yes, ma'am. I will do that right now. Here we go.
Okay.
Drawing number 1 is hey. So this worked out beautifully because Pen, you were the one in the first one that it was malfunctioning for, so you're on now. So I know I have your contact info because Penn actually just subscribed to the journal, so he's already a very cool person. But
so yeah, check with him. Yeah, check with him to see if he wants to. You can see if he wants another one other than Shakespeare.
Well, no. The whole point is only a digital subscription, so this will be like a free upgrade.
Okay, cool.
So that works out really well.
Yeah.
But all right, and let me shuffle again for our second. So this is for the annual subscription. Sorry, you can't win twice. So if I hit pen again, I'm going to draw a third time. Here we go. It's coming. All right, this is a YouTube person, so we will reach out to you via YouTube because I don't know who you are, but we will get in touch with you to get your info.
Yeah, I actually know who this is. This is my mom.
10 drawings down the road because
I know who this is my mom.
I love it.
She watches all my videos.
Well, my mom doesn't watch my videos, so I don't know what that says. But man, well, I think all right, Carla, you think we should roll the credits and we will we'll call it a day until next time?
Yeah, so thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you so much, Joe and Sarah, for all your hard work and basically spending half a year on this. And we hope everyone has a wonderful, wonderful Christmas. So until next time.